Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The silence that descended upon Harbor Light Restaurant was so profound, it seemed to absorb all sound. Conversations ceased mid-sentence, forks froze halfway to mouths, and dozens of pairs of eyes turned toward the narrow space between tables where 7-year-old Lucas Mitchell stood trembling, his legs encased in gleaming metal braces as he extended a small hand toward Sophia Reed, the restaurant's waitress. The grand piano in the corner had just begun playing a gentle melody when the boy's sudden impulse to ask someone to dance emerged without warning. "Sir, please control your child," Manager Philippe's crisp voice sliced through the heavy silence. "This behavior is inappropriate. This is not a community center, and our staff are not here to entertain children." David Mitchell, founder of Mitchell Innovations, and one of Toronto's wealthiest tech entrepreneurs at 37, felt his throat constrict. This was the first time he had brought Lucas to a public dinner since the devastating accident that had partially paralyzed his son's legs 3 years earlier. A mistake he had sworn never to repeat. "Lucas, sit down immediately." The command came low but firm. Sophia remained motionless, her gaze shifting between the stern manager, the powerful businessman, and the boy whose outstretched hand hung in the air like a fragile bridge between worlds. Then, to everyone's complete amazement, she untied her apron and gently took Lucas's hand. "I can't dance properly in an apron," she said simply, her voice carrying across the stunned restaurant. "Please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from." Now, let's continue with our story. David Mitchell had not always been the cold, calculating businessman that Toronto's financial district now knew. At 37, his striking features still held traces of the university hockey player he once was, though 3 years of grief had carved permanent lines around his dark eyes. Since losing Emma in that horrific winter accident, he had retreated into the one sanctuary he could control. Mitchell Innovations, now valued at over $2 billion. His glass-walled office overlooking Lake Ontario had become both fortress and prison. For 7-year-old Lucas, the world had shrunk to the confines of their sprawling Muskoka cottage and the rotating team of specialists his father hired. The accident that damaged his spinal cord had stolen not just his mobility, but his voice as well. He hadn't spoken a single word since that snow-filled night that claimed his mother. His dark eyes, so reminiscent of Emma's, watched the world with the weariness of an old soul. The metal braces supporting his legs were merely the visible manifestation of invisible constraints that bound his spirit. David had tried everything money could buy: world-renowned specialists, experimental therapies, the most advanced mobility devices available. Yet nothing had restored his son's smile or voice. He approached Lucas's recovery like a business challenge, with strategies, timelines, and measurable outcomes. This methodical approach had built his tech empire, but was failing spectacularly at rebuilding his shattered family. Sophia Reed hadn't planned on being a waitress at 30. With her incomplete master's degree in therapeutic movement, she should have been running her own clinical practice. Instead, she juggled 3 jobs: serving tables at Harbor Light, weekend shifts at a vintage bookstore, and operating Harmony Motion, her struggling dance program for children with mobility challenges from a converted warehouse near Toronto's waterfront. The program survived on donations and determination, with a waiting list that grew longer each month. The converted warehouse wasn't impressive: exposed pipes, scuffed wooden floors, and second-hand equipment. But it contained more genuine healing than the sterile therapy rooms of Toronto's finest hospitals. Here, children weren't defined by their limitations, but encouraged to discover their own rhythms. Sophia's methods were unconventional but effective, drawing on her background as a professional dancer before a career-ending knee injury. Her philosophy was elegantly simple: let the children lead. What no one at Harbor Light Restaurant knew that evening was that the paths of the waitress and the billionaire had crossed once before, on an ice-covered highway 3 years earlier, in moments that had forever altered all their lives. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice carried the authority of someone unaccustomed to being defied. Sophia met his gaze steadily. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir." Her voice remained calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the man she had researched for months. Before anyone could intervene, Lucas took a hesitant step forward. His foot dragged across the floor, and the metal of his braces created a soft scraping sound. But Sophia didn't attempt to guide or hurry him. She simply adjusted her pace to match his. "She'll be fired tomorrow morning," whispered a woman at the neighboring table, not bothering to lower her voice. Philippe stood frozen, his face flushed with embarrassment. The restaurant's reputation for catering to Toronto's elite hung in the balance as his waitress danced with a disabled child in the middle of the dinner service. David watched, paralyzed by a sudden memory: Emma laughing as she danced with 3-year-old Lucas in their living room. "It's not about perfection," she had said. "It's about connection." The memory pierced through him like a blade. As Sophia followed Lucas's careful, unsteady steps, something profound shifted in the boy's eyes. Fear gave way to intense concentration. Shame transformed into shy pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being guided, helped, or corrected. He was leading. The piano player, sensing something important unfolding, softened his touch and slowed the tempo to match Lucas's deliberate movements. The restaurant's ambient noise had completely vanished, as though the entire establishment held its collective breath. Rain began tapping against Harbor Light's tall windows, the Toronto skyline blurring behind sheets of water. Inside, bathed in warm light, time seemed suspended as the waitress and the little boy moved in their small, imperfect dance. "Mr. Mitchell," Philippe's voice interrupted David's thoughts. "I can assure you this will never happen again. She will be properly disciplined." David didn't respond. The entire restaurant seemed to await his reaction. After all, a man of his influence could end anyone's career with a single word. Employees had stopped their tasks. Other customers watched with morbid curiosity. But Lucas's smile was the only thing that registered in David's mind. It was small and tentative, but it was the first genuine smile he had witnessed in 3 years. The boy who stared vacantly through therapists and doctors was suddenly present, engaged in the moment. After 3 careful steps, Sophia led Lucas back to their table. "Thank you for asking me," she said formally, as if speaking to an adult. "It was truly an honor." When she turned to leave, David stopped her. "Wait." His voice sounded different, almost unrecognizable to himself. "What's your full name?" "Sophia Reed, sir." Her eyes, he noticed, were steady and unafraid. David nodded slowly. "Sophia Reed," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. Then he retrieved a business card from his jacket and held it out to her. "My office tomorrow at 10 in the morning." The entire restaurant held its breath. Philippe's face brightened with vindictive satisfaction, assuming the powerful patron would be lodging a formal complaint. Sophia accepted the card without showing emotion, though her hand trembled slightly. The embossed lettering confirmed what she already knew: David Mitchell, CEO, Mitchell Innovations. "Dad," Lucas called as she walked away, his small voice surprising everyone who knew he hadn't spoken publicly in 3 years. "Why did you do that?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. David looked at his son, and for a brief moment saw not just the broken child that medical reports had reduced him to, but a complete human being whose wants and needs he had systematically overlooked. As dinner proceeded in awkward silence, no one noticed Sophia's expression before she departed, not one of fear or resignation, but of calm determination. In her tiny apartment in Kensington Market, hidden in a desk drawer, was a folder filled with newspaper clippings about the Mitchell family, research about pediatric mobility treatments, and a photograph of Emma Mitchell accepting an award for her charitable foundation 1 week before her death. The next morning, Toronto's persistent November rain had given way to rare autumn sunshine. Sophia stood before the imposing glass tower of Mitchell Innovations, smoothing her best navy dress, purchased second-hand, but carefully pressed. She had rehearsed this meeting for months, never expecting it would come from a spontaneous dance. The lobby sparkled with marble and steel, reflecting morning light in dazzling patterns. Executives and assistants hurried past, their designer clothing and purposeful strides marking them as people who belonged. Sophia clutched her worn leather portfolio to her chest, feeling conspicuously out of place. "Sophia Reed to see Mr. Mitchell," she told the receptionist, who examined her with clinical detachment before making a call. 22nd floor. "Ms. Harrison will meet you at the elevator." Sophia took a deep breath. This wasn't just about a job offer or a dance with a little boy. It was about fulfilling a promise she had made 3 years ago on an ice-covered highway, as she held a frightened child's hand and whispered that everything would be okay, the night she couldn't save Emma Mitchell. Ms. Harrison was a thin woman in her 50s with immaculate silver hair and a gaze that evaluated and dismissed Sophia in seconds. "Mr. Mitchell is finishing a conference call. Wait here." The executive waiting area featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Ontario. On clear days like this, the CN Tower was visible in the distance, majestic against the blue sky. Sophia remained standing, too nervous to sink into the leather chairs. "He had you fired, didn't he, miss?" Ms. Harrison asked suddenly, returning to the waiting area. "It happens. Powerful men make calls, and people like you lose their jobs." "People like me?" Sophia kept her voice neutral. "You know what I mean." The assistant adjusted her glasses. Employees who don't know their place. Sophia smiled, not amused. And where exactly would that be? Before Ms. Harrison could answer, her phone rang. He'll see you now. David Mitchell's office occupied the entire corner of the 22nd floor. Through the windows, Toronto spread out like a model city, the CN Tower rising majestically in the distance. The man himself stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, gaze fixed on his domain. Mr. Mitchell, Sophia greeted him formally. David turned. Up close, the shadows under his eyes were more pronounced than they had appeared in the restaurant. Miss Reed, thank you for coming. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. The silence that followed was calculated, a tactic Sophia recognized immediately. It was the kind of silence designed to make nervous people talk too much, incriminate themselves. She remained still, hands folded in her lap, waiting. Do you have a background? David finally asked, settling into his leather chair. Excuse me. Education, university. His tone was clipped, businesslike. Sophia kept her gaze steady. Bachelor's degree in therapeutic movement from University of Toronto. Incomplete master's in pediatric rehabilitation. Something flashed across David's face, surprise perhaps. And you work as a waitress. I work 3 jobs, actually, she corrected him. The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and I run Harmony Motion, a dance program for children with mobility challenges. David leaned forward, picking up a folder from his desk. I did some research on you, Miss Reed. I wanted to understand who the person was who. He hesitated, danced with my son. He opened the folder, revealing printed photos of a warehouse space with children using various mobility devices. Harmony Motion. You founded that 3 years ago. Sophia sat up straighter. Yes, we provide movement therapy for children with physical disabilities. David leafed through documents, which is now about to close due to lack of funding. Sophia showed no surprise that he would discover this in less than 24 hours. I didn't come here to ask you for money, Mr. Mitchell. Then why did you come? Because you invited me. David laughed softly, a joyless sound. Fair enough. He stood again, restless energy radiating from him as he paced. I want you to work for me. Sophia blinked, genuinely taken aback. As what? A nanny? David's face hardened. As a therapeutic companion for Lucas. His son's name seemed difficult for him to say. Sophia noticed how his eyes momentarily drifted to a photo on the desk. Emma, golden-haired and smiling, with a younger Lucas on her lap. I have the best specialists in the country, David continued. Physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you did yesterday, he paused, as if the words betrayed him. It was just a dance, Mr. Mitchell. It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident. The admission was painful, dragged from somewhere deep. The first time he's spoken to me in public. David turned to face the window again, his reflection showing a vulnerability he wouldn't allow her to see directly. I don't want a dancer for my son. I want someone who can do what you did, follow, not lead. Sophia studied the man in front of her. Beneath the facade of power and control, she saw what others might not, a desperate, lost father. She had read about his meteoric rise in the tech industry, his marriage to philanthropist Emma Campbell, their picture-perfect life, and then the accident that shattered it all. I can pay you 5 times what you're making now, enough to save your program. Sophia stood up. No. David looked shocked, like someone unaccustomed to hearing that word. "Excuse me. I don't work for people who see only my job title before they see my qualifications," she explained calmly. "And I definitely don't work for people who try to buy solutions to emotional problems." David's face flushed. "You're turning down an offer that would solve your financial problems out of pride." "Out of dignity," Sophia corrected. "And because your son deserves more than someone hired to pretend to care." She walked toward the door, then paused. "Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs space to lead his own life. You don't know my son." "No," Sophia agreed, turning back. "But I know children like him. Children whose physical limitations are nothing compared to the invisible cages we build around them." She took a card from her portfolio and placed it on the table. "Harmony Motion. Classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the first class is free." As she reached for the door handle, David spoke again. "You were there, weren't you?" Sophia froze, her back to him. "The accident 3 years ago on Highway 401. You were the first responder they mentioned in the police report." Slowly she turned. In his hand was another folder, one she hadn't noticed before. Her heart pounded in her ears. "I recognize you now," David continued, his voice hollow. "You were holding Lucas's hand when the paramedics arrived. You were covered in blood, my wife's blood." The office seemed to shrink around them. Outside, clouds had moved in, darkening the previously bright day. Toronto's changeable weather mirrored the sudden shift in the room. "Yes," Sophia whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Would you have listened? The billionaire CEO and the woman who was first on scene. Our worlds don't exactly intersect, Mr. Mitchell." David came around the desk, his movements deliberate. "What happened that night? The full version, not the sanitized report my lawyers gave me." Sophia closed her eyes briefly. The memories she had tried to compartmentalize came rushing back, shattered glass glittering in headlights, the smell of gasoline and copper, Emma's fading pulse beneath her fingers, Lucas's terrified whimpers. "I was driving home from a late class. Your car was already overturned when I arrived. You were unconscious in the front seat. I checked on you first, confirmed you were breathing, then I heard Lucas crying." David's face was a mask of controlled pain. "And Emma?" "She was still conscious when I reached her. The driver's side took the worst impact. She was pinned, bleeding heavily." Sophia's voice caught. "She told me to get Lucas out first." The silence that followed was heavy, with unspoken grief. "I got Lucas out through the rear window, put him in my car with the heat on, then I went back for Emma. But by then," Sophia couldn't finish. "By then she was gone," David completed, his voice flat. "She said something before I left her to get Lucas." Sophia met his eyes directly. She said, "Tell David to let him dance." David staggered slightly, catching himself against the desk. The composed CEO was gone, replaced by a man confronting a truth he hadn't been ready to hear. "You're lying," he whispered. "I have no reason to lie, Mr. Mitchell." Sophia's voice was gentle. "Your wife's last thoughts were of Lucas's happiness. That's why I started Harmony Motion. That's why I let him lead when he asked me to dance. I was keeping a promise." Outside, rain began to fall again, pattering against the vast windows. Inside the gleaming office, the distance between billionaire and waitress had collapsed, connected by a shared moment that had defined them both. "Get out," David said, his voice breaking. "Please just go." Sophia nodded, understanding he needed space to process. As she opened the door, she said quietly, "The offer still stands. Tuesdays and Thursdays for Emma." Ms. Harrison looked up curiously as Sophia exited the office, surprised to see her emerge without being escorted out by security. Sophia walked to the elevator with her head high, leaving behind her card and a truth that had waited 3 years to be told. A week passed with no word from David Mitchell. Sophia tried to convince herself it didn't matter. She had delivered Emma's last message and fulfilled her obligation. Yet each time the door of Harmony Motion opened during Thursday's session, her heart jumped, only to sink when another parent entered with their child. The warehouse space near the waterfront hummed with activity. A dozen children with various mobility devices moved to gentle rhythms, each finding their own way to express the music. Sophia moved among them, occasionally offering guidance, but mostly letting them discover their own capabilities. "He's not coming, is he?" Maya Reed approached her sister, adjusting her cardigan. Unlike Sophia's dancer physique, Maya was slight and bookish, the program's administrator and Sophia's greatest supporter. "It was a long shot," Sophia admitted, helping a little girl adjust her forearm crutches. "Men like David Mitchell don't easily change course," Maya pointed out. "Men like David Mitchell don't usually get told no either," Lily pointed out. "You turned down what could have saved this place." Sophia watched as the children moved through their final exercise of the day, a series of movements they had choreographed themselves. Some things aren't meant to be bought. The session ended with their traditional circle, each child sharing one movement they were proud of today. As parents filtered in to collect their children, Sophia began stacking the foam floor mats they couldn't afford to replace. "Sophia," Maya's voice had an unusual edge. "There's a Tesla outside." Through the warehouse's grimy windows, an unmistakable luxury car gleamed in the afternoon sun. Lucas was visible in the back seat, his small face pressed against the window. David remained behind the wheel, hands gripping it as if fighting an internal battle. "He's not coming in," Maya predicted. "Men like him don't come to places like this." But as they watched, the car door opened. Lucas emerged slowly, adjusting his braces with practiced movements. Then, to their surprise, David got out too. The billionaire looked out of place in casual slacks and a sweater, an obvious attempt to dress less formally, but still radiating privilege. "I told you he'd come," Sophia murmured, smoothing her well-worn Harmony Motion t-shirt. Maya stared at her. "What did you do?" Sophia didn't answer, but moved to the entrance to greet them. The heavy warehouse door opened before she reached it. Lucas entered first, his eyes wide as he took in the colorful space with its mirrors and balance bars. David followed, his expression guarded. "Mr. Mitchell," Sophia approached. "Welcome to Harmony Motion." Lucas was already watching the few remaining children gathering their things. A girl in a wheelchair demonstrated a spin to her delighted mother. A boy with leg braces similar to Lucas's practiced a simple step sequence. "It looks chaotic," David commented, visibly uncomfortable in the shabby space that contrasted sharply with his gleaming corporate empire. "There is structure," Sophia replied. "It's just not the kind you're accustomed to recognizing." She turned to Lucas. "Would you like to join in? We're just finishing up, but you can meet some of the kids." The boy nodded enthusiastically, but looked at his father hesitantly. "Go on," David said tensely. "I'll be right here." As Sophia guided Lucas to meet the remaining children, Maya approached David and offered him a folding chair, the only seating they had for parents. "The first day is always the hardest," she commented. "For the parents, not the kids." "This isn't therapy," David argued, glancing around the warehouse with its exposed pipes and worn floors. "I've hired the best rehabilitation specialists in the country." "And how has that been working for Lucas?" Maya asked gently. Before David could respond, the warehouse door opened again. An older woman entered, leaning on an ornate cane. She had gray hair in elegant braids and a commanding presence that drew attention even in her casual clothes. "Dr. Catherine Wells," Maya whispered, "neuroscientist specializing in pediatric rehabilitation, retired from McMaster University." The woman greeted several children before noticing David. Her eyebrows lifted in recognition. "Mr. Mitchell," she approached directly, "your foundation rejected my research proposal 4 times in the last 2 years." David nodded stiffly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I oversee the research component," she explained, settling into a chair beside him with the ease of someone who had earned her right to any seat in the room. "We're studying how child-directed movement approaches affect neural pathway development in pediatric mobility challenges." "Research?" David frowned. "I thought this was just a community dance class." Sophia returned, leaving Lucas exploring movements with another boy. "Harmony Motion is a pilot rehabilitation program based on the theory of movement autonomy," she explained. "We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles." "Why do you work as a waitress if you lead a research program?" David asked directly. "Because we don't have adequate funding yet," Sophia answered simply. "And because people like you rejected us 4 times. Understanding dawned on David's face. "You were Dr. Wells's research assistant on the proposals." "Co-author," Dr. Wells corrected firmly. "Sophia has an incomplete master's degree because she had to leave school to care for her sister during a health crisis. But her theoretical work is groundbreaking." David's gaze sharpened. "You knew who I was at the restaurant from the moment you walked in." Sophia confirmed. "Your family's foundation was our last hope for major funding." "And when Lucas got up to dance," David concluded, his voice hardening, "you saw an opportunity." "No," Sophia's response was immediate. "The dance was genuine. Lucas chose to get up. I chose to follow. What happened between you and me afterward, that was opportunity." They all turned to watch Lucas, who was attempting to mirror movements shown by a slightly older boy with similar braces. His face showed intense concentration, rather than the vacant expression David had grown accustomed to seeing during formal therapy sessions. "We've maintained detailed progress records for every child in our program," Dr. Wells said, opening a tablet. "The improvements in mobility, confidence, and even speech have been remarkable. Children who were told they'd never progress beyond certain limitations are surpassing every expectation." David studied the data, his analytical mind engaging despite his reservations. "These results should have secured your funding." "In a perfect world, perhaps," Dr. Wells sighed. "But innovative approaches face skepticism, especially when they challenge established methodologies and when they come from people without the right connections." Rain began pattering against the warehouse roof, the sound amplified by the high ceilings. The remaining families hurried out, calling goodbyes. Soon, only Lucas remained with the boy he'd been practicing with. "That's Michael," Maya explained, following David's gaze. "Spinal injury from a skating accident 4 years ago. When he came to us, he wouldn't even try to stand without full support. Now look at him." The boy was demonstrating a movement sequence, his braces similar to Lucas's, but less restrictive. His movements had a fluidity that made the metal support seem almost incidental rather than defining. "Could Lucas progress to that level?" David asked quietly. "Every child is different," Sophia answered, joining them. "But yes, potentially. The key is that Michael designed those movements himself. He's not trying to match an external standard of normal movement. He's discovering what his body can do in its own way." As they watched, Michael gestured encouragingly to Lucas, who hesitated, then attempted to mimic a simple turning step. He wobbled dangerously, and David instinctively moved to intervene. Sophia placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Watch." Lucas regained his balance without assistance. The triumph on his face as he completed the modified turn was illuminating. He looked immediately to his father, seeking recognition of his achievement. David nodded, a tight smile acknowledging the moment. But Sophia saw the controlled emotion behind the gesture, the father simultaneously proud and terrified, wanting to protect, yet needing to let go. "Mr. Mitchell, would you mind if I spoke with Lucas privately for a few minutes?" Dr. Wells asked. "I like to assess new children individually." Though clearly reluctant, David agreed. As the doctor led Lucas to a quiet corner with Michael, Sophia guided David toward her small office, little more than a partitioned area with a desk made from an old door atop filing cabinets. "I'd like to show you something," she said, pulling out a worn folder. Inside were photos of dozens of children, each with handwritten progress notes. Every child who's come through our program in the past 3 years. David leafed through the meticulous documentation, his businessman's eye recognizing the care with which each child's journey had been recorded. On the final page was an architectural rendering, crude but detailed, of a much larger facility. "What's this?" he asked. "Our future," Sophia answered simply. "The rehabilitation center we could build if we had the resources. 500 children a year instead of 50. In-house medical support, adaptive equipment, research facilities." "You've planned this thoroughly," David observed, examining the drawings. "I made a promise," Sophia said quietly. "Not just to Emma, but to every child who deserves the chance to move through the world on their own terms." David closed the folder carefully. "You think I've failed my son. I think you've done everything a loving father would do when faced with something he can't control," Sophia corrected gently. "You've sought experts, followed their advice, provided every resource. But sometimes what children need most isn't expertise, it's space." A crash from the main room interrupted them. They rushed out to find Lucas on the floor, one of his braces partially detached. Dr. Wells knelt beside him, speaking calmly, while Michael stood nearby looking worried. "Lucas," David started forward, but once again Sophia caught his arm. "Wait," she urged. "Please." To David's astonishment, Lucas was laughing, actually laughing, as Dr. Wells helped him sit up. Rather than appearing distressed by the fall, the boy seemed energized by it. "I almost did it," he exclaimed, his voice bright with excitement rather than frustration. "Yes, you did," Dr. Wells agreed, helping him adjust the brace. "And next time you'll get even closer." "Dad," Lucas called, noticing David watching. "Did you see? I almost did Michael's spin." The simple sentence, the most words Lucas had strung together voluntarily in David's presence since the accident, struck him like a physical blow. This animated, engaged child seemed miles away from the silent, withdrawn boy he had brought to countless therapy sessions. "I saw," David managed, his voice rough with emotion. Sophia watched the moment unfold, recognizing its significance. For 3 years, David had focused on what Lucas had lost. Perhaps for the first time, he was seeing what his son could still become. The drive home through Toronto's evening traffic was quiet. Rain streaked the Tesla's windows, casting the city lights into blurred watercolors. In the back seat, Lucas dozed, exhausted from the afternoon's activities. David drove automatically, his mind replaying the warehouse scene. At a stoplight, his gaze caught on a billboard for Mitchell Innovation's newest innovation, a neural interface promising to bridge the gap between intention and action. The irony wasn't lost on him. His company specialized in connection technologies, while he and his son remained disconnected. That night, after putting Lucas to bed, David retreated to his home office. The Muskoka cottage was silent except for the persistent rain against the windows. He opened his laptop and typed Highway 401 Accident Mitchell into the search bar. The articles appeared immediately. Toronto's tech titan loses wife, son severely injured. Most focused on the business implications or the tragedy of the golden couple, and none captured the reality of that night or the 3 years that followed. He opened a different folder on his computer, one he rarely accessed. Emma smiled from the screen photographs of their life before. Her with baby Lucas, the 3 of them hiking in Algonquin Park. Emma at the Foundation Gala, passionate about her causes. A video file caught his attention, Lucas's 5th birthday. His cursor hovered over it, hesitating before clicking. Emma's voice filled the room. "Dance with me, my little man." On screen, a healthy, unburdened Lucas giggled as his mother twirled him around their living room. David watched himself enter the frame, initially protesting about the cake still to be cut, then relenting as Emma pulled him into their dance. "It's not about getting the steps right," Emma laughed in the video. "It's about moving together." David closed the laptop. The room suddenly felt too dark, too empty. He moved to Lucas's bedroom, quietly opening the door. In sleep, his son's face was relaxed, free from the concentrated effort that accompanied his waking hours. David sank into the chair beside the bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of Lucas's chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the sleeping child. "I've been trying to fix you when I should have been helping you fly." The next morning, David called his executive assistant. "Cancel my meetings and connect me with the Mitchell Foundation director. I want to review all rejected proposals from the past 2 years, particularly anything related to pediatric rehabilitation." 2 days later, Sophia was leading a small group session when the warehouse door opened. Lucas entered, followed by David, and a woman Sophia recognized as the Mitchell Foundation's executive director. "Miss Reed," David approached, his manner formal but less rigid than before. "I wonder if we might speak after class." The session concluded with the children's customary sharing circle. To Sophia's surprise, David sat cross-legged on the floor beside Lucas, his expensive trousers collecting dust from the worn mats. When the other children had departed, David introduced Vanessa Green, the foundation director. "We've been reviewing your proposals," he said without preamble. "They're impressive, innovative, the kind of work the foundation was established to support." Sophia exchanged glances with Maya, who had joined them. "Thank you. I'd like to understand why they were rejected," David continued, directing the question to Vanessa. The director shifted uncomfortably. The methodology was considered experimental, lacking sufficient evidence base. And frankly, the principal investigator's credentials were questioned. "You mean Sophia's lack of completed degree?" Maya interjected, her protective instinct flaring. "Partly," Vanessa admitted, "and Dr. Wells's unorthodox views on neuroplasticity haven't always aligned with mainstream rehabilitation approaches." David nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And who makes these determinations?" "The Scientific Advisory Board reviews all medical and therapeutic proposals." "The same board that hasn't changed in 5 years?" David asked pointedly. "The same experts who have partnerships with established rehabilitation centers that might view Harmony Motion as competition." Vanessa didn't answer, but her expression confirmed his suspicion. David turned to Lucas, who was showing Michael a new movement he'd practiced at home. "My son had the most productive physical therapy session of his life here. He spoke more words in 2 hours than in 2 months of conventional therapy. That's the only evidence base I need." He faced Sophia directly. "The Mitchell Foundation would like to fully fund Harmony Motion for the next 3 years, with an option to renew based on documented outcomes." Maya gasped. Sophia remained very still, processing his words. "Additionally," David continued, "we'd like to fund the construction of a dedicated facility based on your designs. Vanessa will work with you on the details, but the foundation is prepared to commit up to $15 million to establish what would be called the Mitchell-Reed Pediatric Movement Center." "Mitchell-Reed," Sophia repeated, stunned. "If that's acceptable," David added, "I believe in giving credit where it's due." "Why the change of heart?" Sophia asked directly, unwilling to accept such a reversal without understanding its foundation. David glanced at Lucas, now laughing with Michael as they attempted synchronized movements. "Let's just say I remembered something important about leading and following." He paused, "and about keeping promises." The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken understanding. They both knew he wasn't just funding a program, he was honoring Emma's last wish. "There is one condition," David added, his tone shifting to the businessman once more. Sophia tensed, waiting. "That you complete your master's degree. The foundation will cover all expenses. The center should have properly credentialed leadership." "That's your condition?" Sophia asked incredulously. "Not control of the methodology or the research?" "No," David shook his head. "Those remain entirely yours and Dr. Wells's. My wife believed in your approach before I did. I'm just following her lead, belatedly." Rain began falling outside, a gentle Toronto mist rather than the driving downpour of recent days. Through the warehouse windows, the afternoon light filtered softly, casting long shadows across the worn floor where Lucas continued his careful dance with his new friend. "We have a deal, Mr. Mitchell." Sophia extended her hand. David took it, his grip firm but no longer domineering. "David, please." As they shook hands, Neither noticed Dr. Wells watching them thoughtfully, her experienced eyes seeing beyond the professional agreement to the healing that had begun, not just for Lucas, but for all of them. 6 months later, Toronto's social and business elite gathered for the grand opening of the Mitchell Reed Pediatric Movement Center. The gleaming 3-story building stood on the waterfront where the old warehouse had been, its glass and sustainable wood design reflecting both the city's innovative spirit and the natural beauty of Lake Ontario. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the water, flooding the space with natural light and offering patients inspiring views of the Toronto Islands on clear days. David stood at the podium, surveying the crowd. Business associates, medical professionals, foundation directors, and families of children with mobility challenges filled the main movement hall, a space designed with input from the children themselves. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras ready. This was the first major public appearance for the reclusive CEO since his wife's death 3 years ago. My son Lucas and I experienced a loss that changed everything, David began, his voice steady despite his discomfort with public speaking. He paused, gathering himself. In the aftermath, I did what I thought was right. I sought experts. I applied resources. I approached my son's recovery like a business problem to be solved. Sophia watched from the side of the stage where she stood with Dr. Wells and Maya. Her gaze drifted to Lucas, seated in the front row, wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, a remarkable improvement from the heavy bilateral braces he'd worn just months earlier. I was wrong, David continued, drawing surprised murmurs from those who knew him as a man who never admitted failure. Not wrong to seek help, but wrong in my approach. I wanted to fix my son when what he needed was space to heal in his own way. Camera flashes punctuated his words. Tomorrow's business pages would feature this unexpected vulnerability from one of Toronto's most powerful men. The Mitchell Reed Center represents more than a building or a program. It represents a philosophy that my late wife Emma understood long before I did, that true healing begins when we follow rather than lead. David gestured toward Sophia. I'd like to introduce Sophia Reed, co-founder and director of the center, whose vision made this possible. Applause filled the hall as Sophia stepped forward. In her tailored navy suit, with her master's degree newly completed, she looked every inch the professional, worlds away from the waitress, in an apron who had danced with Lucas. Thank you, David, she began, her voice clear and confident. The Mitchell Reed Center will serve 500 children annually, providing individualized movement therapy based on our proven methodologies. But more importantly, it will serve as a research hub, expanding our understanding of how child-directed movement can transform rehabilitation outcomes. As Sophia outlined the center's programs, David's phone vibrated in his pocket. He discreetly checked the screen, expecting a message from his executive team. Instead, it was an alert from his financial advisor, marked urgent. His stomach tightened. For months, he'd been navigating increasingly troubled waters with his board of directors. The $15 million commitment to the center had come at a precarious time for Mitchell Innovations, with a major product launch delayed and competitors gaining ground. David had supplemented the foundation's contribution with personal funds, selling investments, and even his vacation property to ensure the center was built as designed. The message confirmed his fears. Board called emergency meeting. Stockholders panicking over Q2 projections. Carson gathering votes for leadership change. David slipped the phone back into his pocket, his expression betraying nothing as Sophia continued her presentation. He had known this was coming. Robert Carson, his CFO, had been vocal about the emotional decisions David had made since finding Sophia and Harmony Motion. The speeches concluded, and the ceremonial ribbon was cut by Lucas and Michael together, symbolizing the partnership at the heart of the program. As guests began touring the facility, David slipped away to a quiet office. "How bad is it?" he asked when his financial advisor answered his call. "Bad," came the frank reply. "Carson has convinced the board your personal investment in the center shows instability. The stock is down 17%. Major shareholders are calling for guidance." "I'm still majority shareholder," David reminded him. "Barely, and if the stock falls another 10 points, the loan covenants trigger. You could lose control." David ended the call as Sophia appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Everything okay?" she asked. He managed to smile. "Just business, nothing to worry about today." But Sophia wasn't easily fooled. "I may not run a tech empire, but I recognize a crisis call when I see one." She closed the door behind her. "Is it the company? Because of the center?" David hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Partly. The timing wasn't ideal for such a major investment." "Why didn't you say something? We could have scaled back, built in phases." "No," David said firmly. "This center is exactly what you designed, what the children need. Mitchell Innovations will weather the storm." Sophia studied him, seeing beyond the confident facade. "You're at risk of losing your company, aren't you?" Before he could answer, the door burst open. Maya rushed in, her face pale. "It's Lucas," she said urgently. "Something's wrong." They found Lucas in one of the therapy rooms, seated on the floor. Dr. Wells knelt beside him, her expression grave. The boy's left leg was extended awkwardly, his lightweight brace seeming suddenly inadequate. "What happened?" David dropped to his knees beside his son, his own crisis forgotten. "His leg gave out during the demonstration," Dr. Wells explained quietly. "No warning, no pain according to Lucas, just sudden weakness." Lucas looked up at his father, fear evident in his eyes. "I couldn't make it work, Dad. I tried the step like we practiced, but my leg wouldn't listen." David gathered his son into his arms, feeling the slight body tremble against him. "It's okay, buddy. We'll figure it out." Within the hour, they were at Toronto's hospital for sick children. As Lucas underwent urgent imaging, David and Sophia waited in uncomfortable silence. Dr. Wells had stayed behind to manage the opening event, promising to join them later. "This can't be happening," David murmured, pacing the private waiting room. He was doing so well. Sophia watched him, her own worry etched on her face. Children with spinal injuries sometimes plateau or regress. It could be temporary. "Or it could be something we missed," David countered, the guilt immediate and crushing. "Maybe if I'd listened to the specialists who wanted more aggressive interventions." "Stop," Sophia interrupted firmly. "You've done everything possible for Lucas. Sometimes healing isn't linear." Before David could respond, a neurologist entered, Dr. Alan Winters, one of the specialists David had consulted after the accident. "Mr. Mitchell," he greeted formally, then nodded to Sophia. "Ms. Reed, how is he?" David asked immediately. Dr. Winters gestured for them to sit. The imaging shows progression of the cystic area around Lucas's L3, L4 vertebrae. It's causing compression that wasn't evident in his scans 6 months ago. What does that mean in plain English? David demanded. It means Lucas's condition is degenerative, not static, as we initially believed. The original injury created an environment for ongoing damage. The doctor's expression was sympathetic but clinical. Without intervention, he's likely to lose function progressively over the next 6 to 12 months. The words hit David like physical blows. Intervention meaning surgery. Yes, complex surgery with significant recovery time and no guarantees. But without it, the prognosis isn't good. Sophia leaned forward. What about alternative approaches? Physical therapy, movement protocols? Dr. Winters shook his head. Those might slow the progression marginally, but they won't address the underlying compression. I understand you've had success with your movement program, Ms. Reed, but this is a structural problem requiring a structural solution. After the doctor left to check on Lucas, David stood at the window, looking out at the Toronto skyline as evening descended. Rain streaked the glass, reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns. I should have had him fully evaluated months ago, he said quietly. I was so focused on his progress at the center that I missed the warning signs. There weren't any warning signs, David, Sophia replied gently. You heard Dr. Winters. This development wouldn't have shown on routine exams. David turned to face her, his expression haunted. My son is facing major surgery with uncertain outcomes. My company is on the brink of being taken from me. And the cruel irony is that I finally thought I was doing something right, following Emma's wishes, letting Lucas lead, building the center. And you were right, Sophia insisted. The center will help hundreds of children. Lucas has made remarkable progress, regardless of this setback. Progress that may be erased by this surgery. David's voice broke slightly. If he survives it at all. The full weight of potential loss crushed down on him. His son's hard-won mobility, the company he'd built from nothing, the promise he'd made to Emma. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. Sophia knelt beside him, placing a hand on his arm. Lucas is stronger than you know. I've watched him face challenges that would break adults, and he does it with grace and determination. He gets that from you. David looked up, surprised by her words. Yes, you, Sophia continued. You may have approached his recovery all wrong at first, but you never gave up. You were willing to change your entire perspective when you saw a better way. That takes a kind of strength most people don't possess. Their moment was interrupted by Dr. Wells's arrival. The neurologist entered with quiet authority, immediately reviewing Lucas's scans with experienced eyes. The compression is significant, she acknowledged, but I've seen similar patterns respond to targeted neural stimulation combined with modified movement protocols. Dr. Winters, who had returned with her, shook his head. Catherine, you know the literature doesn't support non-surgical intervention for this degree of compression. The traditional literature, she corrected. I've been working with a team in Switzerland on new approaches that show promise. Experimental approaches, Dr. Winters emphasized, looking at David with limited data, as opposed to a surgery with 60% success rate. Dr. Wells challenged, and significant risk of further impairment. David listened to the doctor's debate. Their medical terminology washing over him in waves. This was precisely the scenario he had always dreaded, experts disagreeing. No clear path forward, and Lucas's future hanging in the balance. "What would you do?" he asked suddenly, interrupting their technical discussion. "If Lucas were your child, what would you do?" Both doctors fell silent, the hypothetical question cutting through their professional debate. "I would try the non-surgical approach first," Dr. Wells said finally. "If it failed, surgery would still be an option." "I would operate now," Dr. Winters countered, "before further degeneration makes surgery more complex." The contrast couldn't have been clearer. David looked to Sophia, who had remained silent during the doctor's exchange. "And you?" he asked softly. "I would ask Lucas," she answered simply. "He's 7, but he lives in this body. He deserves a voice in what happens to it." Outside the window, the Toronto rain intensified, drumming against the glass as night fell completely. Inside the hospital room where Lucas now slept, sedated for comfort, 3 adults watched over him, each carrying a different vision of his future, each bearing the weight of decisions that would shape not just his life, but all of theirs. David stood at the bedside, gently holding his son's hand. In the sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines and uncertainty, he faced the most important choice of his life. And for the first time, he had no idea which path to take. The days that followed Lucas's diagnosis unfolded in a blur of hospital consultations, second opinions, and increasingly frantic research. David converted a conference room at Sick Kids Hospital into a temporary command center, his laptop and phone constantly active as he balanced Lucas's medical crisis with Mitchell Innovations' financial one. "The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m., Ms. Harrison informed him, her voice uncharacteristically gentle over the speakerphone. "Robert Carson has submitted a formal motion for leadership review." "I'll be there," David replied, rubbing his eyes as he reviewed yet another medical journal article. The conference room table was covered with printouts, surgical outcomes, experimental therapies, rehabilitation protocols, a paper monument to his desperate search for certainty. "David, you haven't left the hospital in 3 days," his assistant reminded him. "Perhaps I should request a postponement." "No," he said firmly. "That would only strengthen Carson's position. I'll handle it." As he ended the call, Sophia entered with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag from the bakery across the street. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She had been at the hospital almost as consistently as David, coordinating with Dr. Wells and managing the newly opened center remotely. "You need to eat something," she said, placing a blueberry muffin in front of him. David nodded absently, his attention already returning to the medical literature. Any word from the Swiss team? Dr. Wells is on a video call with them now. The imaging has been shared, but they're being cautious about making recommendations without examining Lucas personally. "We don't have time for caution," David snapped, immediately regretting his tone. "I'm sorry, it's just—" "I know," Sophia assured him. "We're all feeling the pressure." Down the hall, Lucas remained in his hospital room, subdued but stable. The initial weakness in his leg had progressed slightly, requiring him to use a wheelchair temporarily. The nurses had reported he'd barely spoken since the diagnosis, his recently recovered voice falling silent once more. "Dr. Winters wants an answer by tomorrow," David said quietly. He says the surgical team is ready, but delaying increases the risks. Sophia nodded. They had both heard the surgeon's increasingly urgent recommendations. And the board meeting, same timeline, different crisis. David attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Apparently, I have 24 hours to decide both my son's medical future and my company's leadership. David, Sophia hesitated, then continued carefully. Have you talked to Lucas about any of this? Really talked to him? He's 7, Sophia. He can't possibly understand the complexities of spinal compression or surgical risk factors. No, but he understands his own body and his own fears, she countered gently. Remember what I said about asking him. David closed his laptop, a gesture of concession. What would I even say? Hey buddy, want to roll the dice on experimental treatment or major surgery? You could start by asking how he feels, what he wants, what scares him the most. Sophia reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. You might be surprised by his insight. As David considered her words, his phone buzzed with an alert. The Mitchell Innovation stock had dropped another 8 points in early trading. At this rate, by tomorrow's board meeting, he might already have lost control of his company. Go talk to your son, Sophia urged. I'll update you if Dr. Wells has news from Switzerland. David found Lucas not in his bed, but sitting in his wheelchair by the window, a sketchbook open on his lap. Since the diagnosis, the hospital child life specialists had encouraged him to express his feelings through art. The page showed a dark scribble of blacks and blues, chaotic and confined. That's intense, David commented, pulling a chair beside his son. What are you drawing? Lucas didn't look up. My leg, how it feels inside. David studied the angry swirls. Does it hurt? Not hurt exactly. Lucas's voice was soft, each word carefully chosen. More like scared. My leg feels scared. The simple observation, delivered with a child's directness, struck David deeply. All the medical terminology and professional opinions hadn't captured what Lucas expressed in that single sentence. I'm scared too, David admitted, surprising himself with the confession. This caught Lucas's attention. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. You get scared. Dads definitely get scared, David assured him. Especially when someone they love is going through something hard. Lucas considered this, turning back to his drawing and adding a small patch of yellow to the corner of the dark swirls. The doctors want to do an operation on my back. So he had been listening during the consultations, understanding more than they'd given him credit for. That's one option, David confirmed. Dr. Winters thinks it might help your leg feel better. But I might not dance anymore, Lucas said simply. That's what the nurse told the other nurse when they thought I was sleeping. David felt a surge of anger at the careless comment, quickly followed by sadness at his son's matter-of-fact acceptance. There are risks with surgery, he acknowledged, deciding on honesty. But there are also risks if we don't do anything. What about Dr. Wells's idea, the one without cutting? Again, Lucas had absorbed more than anyone realized. That's another option. It might not work as quickly, and it might not work at all. Lucas added another small touch of yellow to his drawing. But I could still try to dance while we see if it works. Probably yes, in a modified way. The boy was quiet for a long moment, his small fingers gripping the crayon tightly. Mom would say try dancing first. David felt his throat tighten. Why do you think that? because she always said I should try the scary thing before saying I can't do it. Lucas looked up at his father, his expression suddenly older than his years. I haven't been brave, Dad, not since the accident. Lucas, no. David moved to kneel beside the wheelchair, taking his son's hands. You've been incredibly brave. Every day, every step, every therapy session. The boy shook his head. I stopped talking because I was scared. I thought if I was really quiet and didn't bother anyone, nothing else bad would happen. The confession shattered something in David's chest. All this time, the specialists had theorized about neurological causes for Lucas's silence, when the explanation had been so painfully simple, a child's attempt to control an uncontrollable world. Is that why you started talking again at Harmony Motion? David asked gently. Lucas nodded. Sophia said, sometimes our bodies know things before our brains do. My body wanted to dance with her. Then it wanted to talk. And what does your body want now? Lucas considered the question with surprising seriousness. It wants to try Dr. Wells's way first. But he added, his voice small, I'm still scared. David pulled his son into a careful embrace, mindful of the IV line. That's okay. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing something even though you're scared. As he held his child, David's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, likely more crisis alerts about Mitchell Innovations. For the first time in his adult life, he let the calls go unanswered. The empire he had built could crumble tomorrow, but this moment with his son couldn't wait. Outside the hospital window, Toronto's perpetual rain had finally stopped. A weak sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the room and illuminating father and son in a moment of fragile connection. In the hallway, Sophia paused at the doorway, witnessing the scene without interrupting. She quietly retreated, the news from Switzerland, both promising and uncertain, could wait a little longer. The Mitchell Innovations boardroom fell silent as David concluded his presentation. 20 pairs of eyes stared at him, with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to outright dismay. Behind him, the final slide displayed a radical restructuring plan, one that would prioritize the company's new adaptive technology division, while scaling back the consumer products that had built their fortune. To summarize, David said, his voice steady despite having slept only 2 hours. I am proposing we redirect 30% of our research and development budget toward developing technologies that serve children and adults with mobility challenges. The market analysis shows not only a significant unmet need, but also limited competition and favorable regulatory pathways. Robert Carson, the CFO who had called for the leadership review, leaned forward. David, with all due respect, this is precisely the kind of emotional decision-making that concerns the board. Your son's condition has opened my eyes to an opportunity we've been missing, David interrupted firmly. This isn't charity, Robert. It's strategy. The adaptive technology market is projected to reach $50 billion globally within 5 years. And you've come to this revelation overnight. Carson's skepticism was palpable. Just as your son faces a medical crisis. David met his gaze directly. Sometimes clarity comes from unexpected places. My personal circumstances may have directed my attention to this market, but the business case stands on its own merits. Vanessa Green from the Mitchell Foundation, who held a non-voting seat on the board, spoke up. The foundation has been funding innovation in this space for years. The technology needs are substantial and largely unaddressed by major players. Which brings me to my second announcement, David continued. I am selling 30% of my personal shares in Mitchell Innovations to fund a new venture capital firm focused exclusively on adaptive technology startups. The room erupted in exclamations. David selling his shares was unprecedented. He had famously maintained majority control since founding the company. This is corporate suicide, Carson declared. The market will interpret this as a loss of confidence, another board member added. Or as diversification and market expansion, countered Emily Reeves, the marketing director. It depends entirely on how we frame it. David allowed the debate to continue for several minutes before raising his hand. I understand your concerns, but my decision is made. You can vote to remove me as CEO. That's your right as a board. But my share sale and the creation of the VC fund will proceed regardless. The boardroom fell silent again, the weight of the moment settling over them. Finally, Patricia Donovan, the longest-serving board member and David's early mentor, spoke up. I move we table the leadership review and instead form a committee to explore the adaptive technology strategy in detail. David has earned the right to be heard out fully. The vote was narrowly in David's favor, 8-7, with 2 abstentions. As the board members filed out, Patricia lingered. That was either the bravest or the most reckless thing I've seen in 40 years of business, she told him quietly. Carson won't give up. He'll be watching for any sign of weakness. I know, David acknowledged, but for the first time in years, I'm certain about my direction. Does this have anything to do with that center opening? The one with your name on it? Patricia's eyes were shrewd. And perhaps with its director. David smiled slightly. The center opened my eyes to possibilities. As for Sophia Reed, he paused. She reminded me what it means to lead with purpose rather than just ambition. As David left the Mitchell Tower, the weight of one crisis temporarily lifted. His thoughts returned immediately to Lucas. The boy had been transferred that morning to the rehabilitation wing of sick kids, where Dr. Wells had established a temporary treatment space. The Swiss team had provided protocols, and with Dr. Winters reluctantly agreeing to a 6-week trial of non-surgical intervention, they were ready to begin. When David arrived, he found the hospital room transformed. The standard bed had been replaced with a specialized mat, colorful visual targets dotted the walls, and a tablet displayed interactive movement games. Dr. Wells and Sophia were helping Lucas into a lightweight experimental support device for his legs, far less restrictive than traditional braces. Dad, Lucas called, his voice stronger than it had been in days. Look at my new robot legs. David smiled at his son's description of the sleek carbon fiber supports. Very futuristic. How do they feel? Weird, Lucas admitted, but good weird. Like they want to help instead of just hold me up. Dr. Wells adjusted a setting on the device. The sensors respond to Lucas's natural movement patterns instead of forcing a predetermined gait. It's the physical embodiment of our whole philosophy, following rather than leading. How was the board meeting? Sophia asked quietly as Lucas experimented with the supports. I survived, David replied. The leadership review has been tabled, at least temporarily, and the company is about to undergo some significant changes. He watched his son attempt a careful step with the new supports, much like all of us. Over the next 4 weeks, Lucas's treatment regimen consumed their lives. The protocol combined targeted neural stimulation with modified movement therapy 3 times daily. David rearranged his entire schedule, working remotely from the hospital when needed, but prioritizing his presence at Lucas's sessions. Progress was agonizingly slow and frustratingly inconsistent. Some days Lucas showed remarkable improvement, taking several steps with minimal support. Other days, the weakness returned, leaving him frustrated and tearful. Through it all, Dr. Wells maintained her calm confidence, adjusting the protocol based on his responses. Sophia divided her time between the hospital and the newly opened center, which was already operating at capacity. Her staff kept the programs running, but the media attention surrounding the Mitchell family's crisis had created unexpected challenges. Rumors circulated about Lucas's condition and David's commitment to the center. The Toronto Star is running a story questioning whether the center was a guilt project that's now being abandoned. Maya informed Sophia one evening as they reviewed the center's operations. And there's speculation about Mitchell Innovations pulling funding. None of which is true, Sophia sighed, adding it to her growing list of fires to extinguish. David is more committed than ever. Speaking of David, Maya gave her sister a meaningful look. You two seem to have developed quite a connection. Sophia busied herself with paperwork. We're partners in Lucas's care and the center's mission. That's all. Maya hummed skeptically. That explains why you've spent every day for a month at that hospital when the center needs you. The center has you and an excellent staff, Sophia countered. Lucas needs consistent support through this protocol. And David, what does he need? Olivia looked up, caught off guard by the direct question. He needs his son to heal. And after that, Maya pressed gently. Before Sophia could respond, her phone rang David's number. She answered immediately, hearing the strain in his voice. Can you come to the hospital? We've hit a setback. 20 minutes later, Sophia found David pacing outside Lucas's room, while Dr. Wells conducted an examination inside. His face was drawn with exhaustion and worry. What happened? She asked. He woke up unable to move his left leg at all, David explained, his voice rough. No warning, no injury, just complete loss of motor function below the knee. The compression could be increasing, Sophia suggested gently. That's what Dr. Winters said when I called him. He's on his way now, already saying, I told you so, without actually saying it. David ran a hand through his hair. What if we made the wrong choice? What if waiting has made things worse? Before Sophia could answer, the door opened and Dr. Wells emerged. Her expression was serious, but not defeated. It's not what we feared, she began. The imaging shows no increased compression. This appears to be a neurological response. Essentially, his nervous system is temporarily shutting down the pathways we've been working to strengthen. How is that not worse? David demanded. Because we've seen this pattern before in similar cases. It often precedes a significant breakthrough, like the system resetting before establishing new connections. She held up a hand as David began to object. I know how it sounds, but the Swiss team has documented this phenomenon repeatedly. And if you're wrong, David challenged. Then we pivot immediately to surgical intervention, she acknowledged. Dr. Winters is right to come evaluate. We need all options on the table. The next few hours brought a flurry of activity. New scans, consultations, heated debates between specialists. Through it all, Lucas remained eerily calm, watching the adults argue about his body with the resigned expression of a child who had grown too accustomed to being the subject of medical discussion. Late that evening, after the specialists had finally departed with no consensus reached, David found Sophia sitting with Lucas. The boy had finally fallen asleep, his face peaceful despite the uncertainty surrounding him. "You should get some rest," Sophia said softly. "Tomorrow will be another long day." David nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he sat in the chair opposite her, Lucas's bed between them. "I found something today," he said after a long silence. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, worn notebook. It was in a box of Emma's things I finally had the courage to open. Sophia recognized it immediately, a journal with a handcrafted leather cover. "Her foundation notebook," she whispered. David looked up sharply. "You knew about this?" "Emma showed it to me once at a fundraiser about 4 years ago. She was so passionate about creating something for children with mobility challenges." Sophia hesitated. "That's how I first heard about your family, long before the accident." David opened the journal carefully, turning to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "There are sketches here, concepts for a center that looks remarkably like the one we just built, and notes about movement-based therapies that align perfectly with your approach." "Emma was ahead of her time," Sophia said softly. She understood intuitively what some medical professionals are only beginning to accept. "And there's this." David turned to the final written page, dated just days before the accident. "It's a memo to the foundation board, directing them to review and fund a proposal from promising researcher Sophia Reed and her mentor Dr. Catherine Wells." Sophia's breath caught. She was going to fund Harmony Motion. She had already approved it. The memo was never delivered because of the accident. David closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. "All this time, I thought I was fulfilling some vague last wish when I built the center. But Emma had already set everything in motion. She had found you before I did." The revelation hung between them, rearranging their shared history in profound ways. "There's more," David continued, his voice barely audible. "A letter to me tucked inside the back cover. She wrote it the day of the accident, meant to surprise me that evening." He swallowed hard. She knew I was working too much, missing too many moments with her and Lucas. The letter was her way of asking me to reevaluate my priorities. "David," Sophia whispered, reaching across the bed to touch his hand. She wrote, "Life isn't about the empire you build, but about the moments when you let yourself be fully present, like watching our son dance, even if his steps aren't perfect." James's voice broke. She knew. Somehow she knew that Lucas would need this, need to be seen as more than a problem to solve. In the dim light of the hospital room, with the soft beeping of monitors marking time, something shifted between them. The connection that had been forming through crisis and collaboration deepened into something more profound, a shared understanding of loss and purpose. "Tomorrow," David said finally, "I'm going to tell Dr. Winters to hold off on surgery. Not because I'm certain the alternative will work, but because Emma would have given Lucas the chance to find his own way before intervening." "And if it doesn't work?" Sophia asked gently. Then we'll face that together. David's voice was steady. But I'm done making decisions based on fear. As if responding to his father's words, Lucas stirred in his sleep. His left foot, the one that had been immobile that morning, twitched slightly. A tiny movement that might have gone unnoticed if both adults hadn't been watching so intently. "Did you see that?" David whispered, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in days. Sophia nodded, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. "His body knows things his brain doesn't yet, just like he told you." Outside the hospital, Toronto's skyline glittered against the night sky. A constellation of lights reflecting in the waters of Lake Ontario. Inside room 718, a father, a son, and the woman who had changed their lives formed their own constellation, small, but bright against the darkness of uncertainty. Guided by the wisdom of someone who had seen their potential long before they recognized it themselves. 1 year later, Toronto's autumn rain tapped gently against the expansive windows of the Mitchell Reed Pediatric Movement Center. Inside, the main movement hall buzzed with activity as families gathered for the center's first anniversary celebration. Children with various mobility devices moved confidently through the space, some practicing for the upcoming demonstration, others simply enjoying the freedom of movement that had once seemed impossible. David Mitchell stood near the entrance, greeting donors and families with a warmth that would have surprised anyone who knew him in his previous life. At 38, he looked younger than he had a year ago, the rigid tension that had once defined him replaced by a quiet confidence. Mitchell Innovations still bore his name, though his role had shifted to chairman of the board, while a promising executive now managed daily operations. The company's adaptive technology division had exceeded all projections, becoming the fastest-growing segment of their business. "Mr. Mitchell," a mother approached, her daughter's hand in hers. "I just wanted to thank you personally. Before Emily started here, doctors told us she would never walk independently. Now look at her." The little girl demonstrated a few steps, using only a lightweight cane, precisely the kind of small miracle that happened daily at the center. "Emily did all the hard work," David responded with genuine modesty. "We just provided the space for her to find her own way." As the mother and daughter moved on, David checked his watch. Lucas was backstage with the other children, preparing for the performance that would mark the anniversary celebration. The past year had been a journey of incremental progress, devastating setbacks, and unexpected breakthroughs. The non-surgical approach had ultimately succeeded, though not in the straight line everyone had hoped for. Lucas still used a brace on his left leg, but it was minimal, a sleek carbon fiber support that allowed for natural movement while providing stability. Nervous, Sophia appeared beside him, elegant in a simple blue dress, her hair swept up for the occasion. Terrified, David admitted with a smile, "But he's not, and that's what matters." Sophia nodded, understanding perfectly. Their partnership had deepened over the months of Lucas's recovery, professional boundaries gradually blurring into friendship and eventually something more. They moved cautiously, both aware of the complex foundation upon which their relationship was built. "The CBC reporter wants 5 minutes before the program starts," she informed him. Standard questions about the center's first year. "You handle it," David suggested. "You're much better with the press than I am, the billionaire who shuns publicity," Sophia teased gently. "Former billionaire," he corrected. Current, what was that term the Globe and Mail used? Purpose-driven investor. The label amused them both. David's decision to sell a significant portion of his Mitchell Innovations shares had indeed reduced his personal fortune. But the venture capital fund he'd established had already backed a dozen promising startups in the adaptive technology space. His life was richer in ways that couldn't be measured by financial statements. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the program was about to begin. David and Sophia took their seats in the front row as Dr. Wells stepped to the center of the performance space. "Welcome to the first anniversary celebration of the Mitchell Reed Center," she began, her commanding presence requiring no microphone. "1 year ago, we opened these doors with a revolutionary idea that healing happens not when we force bodies to conform to our expectations, but when we create space for each person to discover their own movement. Today, the children will show you what that philosophy looks like in practice." The performance began with younger children demonstrating simple movement sequences, each adapted to their unique abilities. Parents applauded enthusiastically, many wiping away tears as they witnessed capabilities that once seemed impossible. In the second row, Maya Reed sat beside Ms. Harrison, an unlikely friendship having formed between them over months of planning center events. Behind them, Robert Carson, who had eventually come to support David's vision, watched with grudging admiration. The center's success had silenced even the most vocal critics. As the older children took their positions, David leaned forward slightly. Lucas stood center stage, no longer the fragile boy who had reached for a waitress's hand a year ago. At 8, he had grown taller and stronger, his face alight with confidence as he prepared to lead the group's sequence. The music began, a piece Emma had loved, chosen deliberately for this moment. Lucas took a breath, then stepped forward with purpose. His movements weren't perfect by conventional standards, but they carried an authenticity that made them beautiful. The other children followed his lead, each interpreting the sequence in their own way. Sophia slipped her hand into David's as they watched, sharing the moment without words. They had come so far from that first confrontation in his office. Adversaries turned allies, turned something deeper neither had fully named yet. As the performance concluded, the children formed a circle and invited their parents to join them. David moved forward without hesitation, taking his place beside Lucas. Other parents followed, some awkward, some tearful, all proud. The children led a simple movement sequence that everyone could follow, regardless of ability. "This is what healing looks like," Dr. Wells narrated softly. "Not perfect symmetry or standardized movement, but connection, finding joy in the body you have, not longing for the body you don't." When the formal program ended and guests mingled over refreshments, David found himself standing near the center's memorial wall. A portrait of Emma hung there, alongside a plaque describing her early vision for the space. Below it, in a simple frame, was a page from her journal, the sketch that had predicted the center's design years before it existed. "She would be so proud," Sophia said, joining him. "Not just of the center," David replied, "of him." He nodded toward Lucas, who was demonstrating his movement sequence to an attentive Dr. Winters, the surgeon who had eventually become an ally, integrating the center's approach into his practice. "Dad," Lucas called, waving him over. "Dr. Winters says I can try swimming next month." David crossed to his son, moving with the ease of a man who had learned to navigate uncertainty without fear. Behind him, Sophia watched with quiet satisfaction. The journey wasn't over. Lucas would face challenges throughout his life, and the center would continue evolving to meet the needs of hundreds of children. But the foundation had been built, not on fortune or influence, but on the simple wisdom that healing begins when we have the courage to follow rather than lead. Outside, Toronto's persistent rain had given way to a rare, clear evening. Through the center's windows, the setting sun painted the movement hall in warm gold light, illuminating children and parents dancing together, each pair finding their own rhythm, their own steps, their own way forward. As we reach the autumn of our lives, the story of David and Lucas Mitchell reminds us of life's most precious lessons, ones we've learned through our own trials and triumphs. Remember when we thought success meant climbing corporate ladders and building financial security. Yet like David, many of us discovered that true wealth lies in moments of connection. The way a grandchild reaches for our hand, the courage to change course when our carefully constructed plans crumble, the humility to follow when we've spent decades leading. This story echoes our generation's journey, we who witnessed cultural revolutions, technological transformations, and shifting family dynamics. We understand the struggle between control and surrender, between fixing problems and creating space for natural healing. Perhaps you faced your own version of David's crisis, a health diagnosis, a career upheaval, or reconciling with adult children. His journey speaks to our deepest fears, becoming irrelevant, losing what we've built, failing those who depend on us. But it also affirms what we know in our hearts, that it's never too late to change direction, to prioritize connection over perfection, to dance our own imperfect steps. This is our wisdom to share with younger generations. The most meaningful transformations often begin with simply letting go. The letter had promised everything. A sturdy cottage nestled in the Carpathian foothills, a kind husband with gentle hands, a warm hearth, and enough bread to fill her belly each morning. Mikhail Petrov had even written about the 6 goats for fresh milk and cheese at dawn. But as Victoria Ashford stepped off the river barge at Velia Luna port that bitter November afternoon, clutching her 2 leather valises and the folded hope in her coat pocket, there was no man waiting, no sign bearing her name, no cart hitched nearby, just swirling mist, biting wind, and a boy no older than 10 standing barefoot in the mud, studying her with eyes too ancient for his young face. "You are Victoria Ashford?" he asked, his voice sharp as winter frost. Spoken in heavily accented German, her mouth went dry. "Yes." The boy nodded once. "Papa is dead." The words hung in the frigid air between them, not quite landing. Victoria blinked. "What?" "Died 5 days ago. Mining accident. We buried him ourselves." He jutted his chin toward the mountain. "I am Dmitri." Victoria's grip on her bag tightened until her knuckles turned white. This couldn't be happening. Not again. There must be some mistake. "I was to marry him. He sent for me." "Yes," Dmitri said, eyes never leaving her face. "He knew you were coming. That is why Katerina says we waited." His gaze flicked to the departing barge. "She said maybe you would still come anyway." Velia Luna clung to the mountainside like a stubborn memory. Its weathered buildings and muddy streets telling the story of a once prosperous silver mining town, now sliding into despair. The Petrov cottage stood a mile beyond the town limits, perched on a plot of land that overlooked a valley thick with pine and ancient memory. It was November 1885, and winter was already sharpening its teeth against the Carpathian ridges. Victoria Ashford had left Vienna a month ago, fleeing the ghosts that haunted her there. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had already weathered storms most couldn't imagine. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, and her blue eyes held the particular softness that comes only after hardness has had its due. She had been a governess once, before the consumption that claimed her young charge and left her heart as barren as winter fields. The doctor's words still echoed. "You blame yourself too much, Miss Ashford. Some illnesses cannot be prevented." Mikhail Petrov had been a foreman at the Valia Luna silver mine until its closure 2 years prior. His letters had been simple but earnest, speaking of his 6 children, who needed a mother more than he needed a wife. What he hadn't mentioned was the mine accident that would claim his life just days before Victoria's arrival. The children were a mismatched collection of need and resilience. Dmitri, the eldest at 10, had his father's square jaw and suspicious nature. Katerina, 9, moved through the cottage with the weary efficiency of someone who had been mothering too long. 7-year-old Anya barely spoke, but watched everything with knowing eyes that unsettled the townspeople. The twins Pavel and Maxim, age 6, were perpetual motion and mischief. 5-year-old Lizaveta coughed through the nights, her lungs never quite right since birth, and baby Vera, just 8 months old, had her mother's dark eyes, whoever she had been. The shadow of Baron Otto Steinberg, owner of the defunct mine and most of Valia Luna itself, stretched long over the Petrov property. The land, with its hidden value, had been coveted by Steinberg for years. Mikhail's death had simply accelerated plans long in motion. And somewhere between the Petrov cottage and town, Ivan Petrov, the brother Mikhail rarely mentioned, was making his way back to a family he had abandoned years before, carrying secrets that would either save them all or destroy what little remained. Victoria stood in the doorway of the Petrov cottage, her luggage at her feet, taking in what was to have been her marital home. 1 room wide, with sagging porch boards, a door hanging crooked on rusted hinges, and a chimney barely holding together under the weight of sorrow pressing down on it. Inside, it smelled of ash, boiled cabbage, and old wool that hadn't seen clean water in weeks. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she counted the children. 5 pairs of eyes stared back at her. No, 4. Baby Vera was asleep in a wooden crate by the hearth, wrapped in a patched blanket that had seen better days. The rest sat at the table, thin and silent, bowls already set as if supper was just another ghost they were waiting for. Dmitri dropped her valise with a thud that echoed through the cottage, then pulled out the only unbroken chair at the head of the table. "That was Papa's," he said, voice flat as the plains Victoria had crossed to get here. Victoria paused. "Then it stays empty." Dmitri nodded once, approval flickering briefly in his eyes before the guardedness returned. She set her satchel down and stepped toward the hearth. Katerina, the girl with braids and dirt-smudged cheeks, stood slowly, holding a wooden spoon like a weapon. "I am Katerina," she said. "I stir things. Mama used to before she bled out after Vera." Her words were too calm for her age, too practiced in their delivery. Victoria looked at the pot hanging over the fire. Inside was thin broth with a few beans floating, and a single potato cut into 6 pieces. "You cook this when you can," Katerina nodded. "There wasn't much left. Papa said you'd know what to do." Victoria rolled up her sleeves. "Let's start again." She added water from her travel canteen, crushed dried herbs from her bag, and dropped in the piece of salted pork she'd kept hidden from the barge captain back in Budapest. It wasn't much, but the smell changed everything. The silence became a tension. Even baby Vera stirred. She worked quickly, ladling the improved stew into mismatched bowls and handing them out without fanfare. "Eat slowly," she said. "Let your stomach remember what food is." The children obeyed without a word. Katerina blinked fast, as if she didn't know if crying was allowed anymore. Victoria didn't sit. She leaned against the doorframe, watching. Her own stomach ached, but she ignored it. This first meal wasn't for her. It was for claiming their hunger as her responsibility. After they'd eaten, the younger children were put to bed, a collection of blankets and straw pallets in the corner of the cottage. Dmitri stayed behind, hovering near the fire, watching Victoria with undisguised suspicion. "You don't have to stay," he said finally. "Nobody would blame you for getting back on that barge tomorrow." Victoria looked at him steadily. "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter much." His voice was older than his years. "But those little ones in there, they've had enough people leave them." "I'm not leaving, Dmitri." "You say that now. You haven't seen winter here yet." That night, Victoria slept in her traveling clothes, using her coat as a blanket on the hard wooden floor near the fire. She woke several times, once to Lizaveta's coughing, once to baby Vera's hungry cries, and finally near dawn to the sound of scratching at the walls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She sat up, heart pounding. Katerina was already awake, feeding the baby with a rag dipped in watered-down goat's milk. "What's that noise?" Victoria whispered. "Papa says it's just the house settling," Katerina replied, not looking up. "But Mama used to say it was the mountain trying to take back what's hers." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold. "Your father, he died in a mining accident." Katerina's hands stilled. "That's what they told us. Dmitri thinks different." Before Victoria could ask what she meant, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps that silenced even the scratching in the walls. Dmitri was on his feet immediately, the old hunting rifle from above the mantel in his hands. "Who's there?" he called, voice cracking. "It's Widow Moldovan," came a thin voice. "Open up, boy." Dmitri relaxed slightly, but didn't lower the rifle. He opened the door to reveal an elderly woman bundled in layers of worn shawls, a covered basket in her hands. "So she came after all," the widow said, eyes landing on Victoria. "Mikkel was right. You knew I was coming?" Victoria asked, rising to her feet. "Everyone knew. Mikkel announced it at church the Sunday before he died." The old woman stepped inside uninvited, placing the basket on the table. "Brought some bread and preserves. Not much, but it'll help." "Thank you," Victoria said. The widow's sharp eyes swept over the cottage, taking in the sleeping children, the empty cupboards, the general state of decay. "This place needs a woman's touch," she said, then lowered her voice. "And these children need protection." Steinberg was at the tavern last night, talking about the Petrov property again. Dmitri's knuckles whitened around the rifle. "We ain't selling." The widow looked at him sadly. "Might not be up to you, child." She turned to Victoria. "You should know what you've stepped into, miss. This land, There's something Steinberg wants badly enough to. She stopped herself, glancing at Dmitri. After the widow left, Victoria found Dmitri sitting on the porch steps, staring at the ridge where the abandoned mine entrance was just visible in the morning light. "Your father," Victoria said carefully, joining him. The widow seemed to imply his death wasn't an accident. Dmitri didn't look at her. "Papa knew something about the mine, about Steinberg. He wrote it all down." "Wrote what down?" "I don't know, but the night before he died, he made me promise to wait for you at the port." Dmitri finally turned to her, his young face grave in the dawn light. "He said you'd know what to do with his words when the time came." Victoria felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders. She had come to be a wife, then thought perhaps she'd be a mother. Now it seemed she was to be something else entirely. Keeper of secrets she didn't yet understand, protector of land she had no claim to, and guardian of children who expected her to save them from forces she couldn't yet see. That afternoon, while the children napped, Victoria found herself drawn to a loose floorboard near the hearth. Beneath it, tucked in a leather pouch, was a letter addressed simply for Victoria. Mikhail Petrov had written to her after all, not with promises of marriage, but with warnings of what was to come. A month had passed since Victoria's arrival in Velia Luna. October's crisp air had given way to November's bite, and frost etched delicate patterns on the cottage's windows each morning. Inside, small changes had taken root. The floorboards gleamed from scrubbing, patched curtains hung in the windows, and the children's clothes, though still worn thin, were clean and mended. Victoria had established routines where there had been chaos. Breakfast at dawn, lessons at the scarred wooden table, chores divided among small, willing hands, and some not so willing. The younger children had warmed to her quickly, Pavel clinging to her skirts, Lizaveta shadowing her steps, Anya reaching for her at night when the coughing fits came. Even baby Vera had begun to recognize her tiny fingers curling around hers when she fed her. But Dmitri remained a fortress, his defenses high and impenetrable. He spoke to Victoria only when necessary, disappeared for hours into the woods, and watched her with eyes that measured and judged her every move. "He'll come around," Katerina told her one evening as they washed dishes in the tin basin. "He's just scared you'll leave like everyone else." "I'm not leaving," Victoria said, the words becoming a mantra she repeated to herself as much as to others. That morning, Dmitri had been particularly distant, disappearing before breakfast and returning only as Victoria was laying out lunch. Cold bread and the last of widow Moldovan's preserves. He slammed a wrinkled paper onto the table. "Found this nailed to the oak at the property line," he said, voice tight. Victoria wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the notice. Her stomach dropped as she read. "Legal notice of intent to reclaim. The property known as Petrov Homestead is hereby notified of outstanding debts to Velia Luna Mining Company. Proof of ownership and satisfaction of debts must be presented within 60 days or property will revert to Steinberg Holdings. By order of Baron Otto Steinberg, Director." "They can't do this," Victoria said, though uncertainty colored her voice. "They can and they will," Dmitri replied. "Papa always said Steinberg wanted our land, even before the mine closed." "But why? The mine's played out, isn't it?" Dmitri shrugged. "Papa thought there was something else, something worth more than silver." Victoria folded the notice carefully. "We need to find your father's deed. The letter I found mentioned papers hidden somewhere safe. We've looked everywhere, Katerina said from the doorway, Anya a silent shadow behind her. Before Victoria could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats silenced them all. Dmitri grabbed the rifle instinctively, but Victoria placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Let me," she said quietly, and stepped onto the porch. The rider approached slowly, a tall man with broad shoulders and a week's worth of beard shadowing his jaw. He had Dmitri's eyes and the same set to his mouth. He stopped a respectful distance from the cottage and removed his hat. "You must be Victoria," he said in accented German. "I'm Ivan Petrov." Dmitri appeared at Victoria's side, rifle still in hand. "Uncle Ivan," he said, voice flat. "Bit late for condolences." Ivan dismounted, his movements careful as if approaching skittish animals. "I only heard about Mikkel last week. Been working up in Hungarian mines." Victoria studied him. Mikkel's letters had barely mentioned a brother, and never by name. "Mr. Petrov," she said formally. "The children didn't mention you'd be coming. They didn't know." Ivan's eyes swept over the cottage, taking in the improvements and the obvious poverty that still clung to the place. "Mikkel and I weren't close these past years." "Then why are you here now?" Dmitri demanded. Ivan reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a folded paper. "Found this notice in town. Thought you should know. Steinberg's telling everyone the Petrov claim was never properly filed. Says he's got the law on his side." Victoria felt her chest tighten. "We've received a similar notice. We have 60 days. Ivan nodded grimly. "That's generous by Steinberg standards. Usually he just sends his men." "You know him?" Victoria asked. "Worked for him before Mikkel, and I had our falling out." Ivan's eyes darkened. "Know enough to be worried for you all." Dmitri scoffed. "We don't need your worry. Where were you when Papa died, when we had to dig his grave ourselves?" Pain flashed across Ivan's face, quickly masked. "I'm here now, Dmitri. We don't need you now." Dmitri turned and stormed back into the cottage. Victoria remained on the porch, uncertain of this new complication. "Mr. Petrov, I don't mean to be unwelcoming, but I'm a stranger who's shown up at a convenient time," Ivan finished for her. "I understand your caution, Miss Ashford. Mikkel wrote to me about you. Said you had a backbone of steel beneath those proper Viennese manners." The mention of Mikkel's letters to his brother stirred something in Victoria. "He wrote to you about me. Just once, right before he died. Said if anything happened to him, you'd be the one to make sure his children and his land stayed together." That evening, Victoria walked into town for supplies, leaving Ivan to help Dmitri repair the leaking roof. The main street of Velia Luna was barely more than a muddy path lined with false-fronted buildings. The general store, a tavern, the small church, and a handful of other establishments clinging to existence. As she entered the general store, the buzz of conversation died abruptly. 3 women huddled near the dry goods counter turned to stare at her, their eyes cold with judgment. "Afternoon," Victoria said politely, setting her basket on the counter. The storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, gave her a tight nod. "Miss Ashford, what can I get for you?" 5 pounds of flour, please. Some coffee if you have it, and whatever meat you can spare." As the storekeeper gathered her items, one of the women approached. "You're the mail order bride," she said. Not a question, but an accusation. "The one who's staying on at the Petrov place." Victoria met her gaze steadily. I am. Not proper, another woman muttered. Living there with those children, no husband. And now that brother's shown up too. The children need care, Victoria said simply. Children need a proper home, the first woman insisted. Father Dumitru was saying just yesterday those poor souls would be better placed with good Christian families in town. Especially now. Victoria felt ice form in her veins. Especially now. The third woman leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper loud enough for all to hear. That land is cursed, miss. Mikhail Petrov wasn't the first to die unnatural there. That whole family's marked. Everyone knows it. Superstitious nonsense, Victoria said firmly. Is it? The woman challenged. Ask around about the Petrov family sometime. Ask why Mikhail's wife really died. Ask why that littlest girl doesn't speak. There's darkness on that ridge, miss, and you'd be wise to leave it before it claims you too. The ride back to the cottage was tense. Victoria's mind churning with the women's words and the weight of the notice in her pocket. As she approached the Petrov property, she noticed a figure standing at the edge of the woods. Anya, the silent 7-year-old, staring intently at something Victoria couldn't see. Anya, Victoria called softly, dismounting. What are you doing out here alone? Anya turned, her solemn eyes finding Victoria's. For a moment, she seemed older somehow, weighted with knowledge no child should possess. Then, for the first time since Victoria's arrival, she spoke. Papa says the papers are where the water meets the stone, she whispered. He says to hurry. Victoria felt gooseflesh rise on her arms. Your papa told you this. Anya nodded, pointing toward the abandoned mine entrance visible on the ridge. He's waiting there. He can't rest until the truth is told. That night after the children were asleep, Victoria sat with Ivan at the kitchen table, the lamp burning low. Anya spoke today, she said quietly. She said Mikhail is waiting at the mine, that he can't rest until the truth is told. She hesitated. The women in town said this land is cursed, that Mikhail's death wasn't the first unnatural one. Ivan's face was half in shadow. People talk. These mountains breed superstition like the valleys breed corn. But you know something, Victoria pressed. About Mikhail's death, about why Steinberg wants this land so badly. Ivan was silent for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. Mikhail didn't die in a mining accident, Victoria. He was murdered, and I think I know why. The next morning dawned gray and forbidding, with heavy clouds promising snow before nightfall. Victoria rose before the children, stoking the fire and setting water to boil for porridge. Ivan had slept in the barn despite her reluctant offer of floor space in the cottage. His words from the previous night echoed in her mind. Mikhail was murdered. According to Ivan, Mikhail had discovered something in the old north shaft. Something valuable enough that Baron Steinberg would kill to keep it secret. But Ivan claimed not to know exactly what his brother had found. Only that Mikhail had started acting strangely in the weeks before his death, measuring the property boundaries, and staying up late writing in his journal. A journal, Victoria had asked. Where is it now? Ivan had shaken his head. If I knew, I'd have it already. As she stirred the porridge, Victoria's mind churned with possibilities. If they could find Mikhail's journal or the deed to the property, they might have a chance against Steinberg. But where would a man hide his most precious documents? Where the water meets the stone, Anya had said. But what did that mean? The children filtered into the main room one by one, sleep rumpled and shivering in the morning chill. Katerina immediately took over stirring the porridge while Victoria fed baby Vera. The routine was comfortable now, edges smoothed by repetition and growing trust. All except Dmitri, who entered last, his face closed and weary. "Your uncle's gone," he announced, dropping an armful of firewood beside the hearth. "Took his horse before sunrise." Victoria frowned. Did he say where he was going? "No," Dmitri replied shortly, "but I found these by his bedroll." He held out a crumpled telegram and a folded map. Victoria took them, shifting Vera to her hip. The telegram was brief: "Meet tonight, usual place. Come alone. S. Baron Steinberg." The map was of the Petrov property, with markings around the abandoned mine entrance. Dmitri watched her face carefully as she studied it. "He's working with Steinberg," Dmitri said, his voice hard with betrayal. "Just like I said." "We don't know that," Victoria cautioned, though doubt crept into her mind. Why would Ivan have such a telegram if he wasn't somehow involved with Steinberg? "Papa never trusted him," Dmitri insisted. "Said Uncle Ivan would sell his own mother for the right price." Victoria folded the papers carefully. "Then we'll be cautious. But Dmitri, we may need his help to save this land. We can't fight Steinberg alone." Dmitri's jaw set stubbornly. "We've been alone since Papa died. We don't need him now." After breakfast, Victoria set the younger children to their lessons. Simple sums for the twins, letters for Lizaveta. While Katerina took baby Vera outside to the small vegetable garden they'd started, Dmitri had disappeared again, likely tracking his uncle. Victoria used the moment of relative quiet to begin a systematic search of the cottage. If Mikkel had hidden documents, where would they be? She checked beneath floorboards, inside the hollow leg of the table, behind loose stones in the fireplace. Nothing. She was about to give up when Anya appeared at her elbow, silent as a shadow. "Not here," the girl whispered. "Papa kept his secrets in the earth." A chill ran down Victoria's spine. "What do you mean, Anya?" Anya's solemn eyes met hers. "I can show you, but only when the moon is dark." Before Victoria could question her further, a commotion erupted outside. Katerina's voice called urgently for help. Victoria rushed out to find Pavel sprawled in the dirt, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "He fell from the apple tree," Katerina explained, her face pale. "I told him not to climb so high." Victoria quickly assessed the wound. Deep, but not dangerous. As she cleaned and bandaged it using strips torn from her own petticoat, she spoke soothingly to the frightened boy. "You'll have a fine scar to show for your adventure, Pavel. Very distinguished," Pavel sniffled. "Like Papa's scar." "Just like your Papa's," Victoria agreed, though she'd never seen Mikhail Petrov in life and had no idea what scars he might have borne. "Papa got his scar in the mine," Maxim offered, hovering anxiously nearby. "He said it was from fighting the mountain spirit when it tried to keep him from its treasures." Victoria's hand stilled. "What treasures?" The twins exchanged glances. "The shiny rocks," Pavel said. "Papa showed us once, said they were going to save the farm someday." "Where did he keep these rocks?" Victoria asked carefully. Maxim shrugged. "Don't know. He hid them after he showed us. Said they weren't safe in the house." Another piece of the puzzle, Victoria thought. Shiny rocks valuable enough to save the farm, perhaps valuable enough to kill for. Silver, gold, whatever Mikkel had found, it was likely the real reason Steinberg wanted the Petrov property. That afternoon, as clouds gathered more ominously overhead, a wagon approached the cottage. Victoria tensed, gathering the children behind her. But it was only Widow Moldovan, accompanied by a tall, austere man in a black coat, Father Dumitru from the town church. Miss Ashford, the priest greeted her, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. I've come to speak with you about the children's spiritual welfare. Victoria invited them in reluctantly, setting Katerina to make tea while the younger children were sent outside despite the threatening weather. Only Dmitri remained, standing like a sentinel by the fireplace, his eyes never leaving the priest. I'll be direct, Miss Ashford, Father Dumitru said once they were seated. There is talk in town about the propriety of your situation here. An unmarried woman living alone with 6 children, and now I understand Mikkel's brother as well. Mr. Petrov is helping with repairs, Victoria said evenly. He sleeps in the barn. Nevertheless, the priest continued, appearances matter. These children have suffered enough without the burden of scandal. Widow Moldovan cleared her throat. What the father is trying to say, Victoria, is that there's a meeting called for tomorrow at the church. Some folks are pushing to have the children removed and placed with families in town. Victoria felt as if she'd been struck. Removed on what grounds? Moral concerns, Father Dumitru said. Financial instability. And of course, the matter of legal guardianship. You are neither their mother nor, as the marriage was never performed, their stepmother. I am all they have, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. Not quite, the priest replied. Baron Steinberg has generously offered to ensure all the Petrov children are placed with good Christian families. He's even offered to pay for their education. Dmitri made a strangled sound of protest, but Victoria silenced him with a look. How convenient for Baron Steinberg, she said coldly. And once the children are gone, what happens to their property? Father Dumitru had the grace to look uncomfortable. The law is clear. Without an adult Petrov to claim it, and with the outstanding debts to the mining company. You mean it would go to Steinberg, Victoria finished. How charitable of him to solve his property dispute by separating 6 orphaned children from the only home they've ever known. Miss Ashford, the priest began, but Victoria stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Please tell the town that I will be at the meeting tomorrow, she said firmly. And I will bring proof that Mikkel Petrov intended me to care for his children on this land. Good day, Father. After they left, Dmitri looked at Victoria with something new in his eyes, respect tinged with worry. We don't have any proof, he said quietly. Then we'll find it, Victoria replied. Tonight. As dusk fell, the first snowflakes began to whirl outside the windows. Victoria put the younger children to bed early, telling them stories of Viennese snowfalls, and promising that tomorrow they would build snow creatures in the yard. Only when the last little one was sleeping did she gather Dmitri, Katerina, and Anya in the kitchen. We need to find your father's papers tonight, she told them. Anya, you said he kept his secrets in the earth. What did you mean? Anya's voice was barely above a whisper. The old well behind the barn. Papa said it's where the water meets the stone. Dmitri's eyes widened. The dry well, but it's been empty for years. It's not empty, Anya insisted, just waiting. With lanterns and ropes, the 4 of them made their way to the old well behind the barn. Snow was falling more heavily now, muffling their footsteps and creating a curtain of white around their small circle of lantern light. The well was covered with weathered boards, untouched for years by the look of them. Dmitri and Victoria worked together to pry the boards loose. Beneath was a circular stone opening, a black mouth leading down into the earth. Dmitri held his lantern over the edge, but the light couldn't penetrate the darkness below. "I'll go," he said, already tying the rope around his waist. "No," Victoria countered. "I'm lighter. I'll go, and you three can lower me down and pull me back up." Dmitri looked ready to argue, but Katerina spoke first. "She's right, Dmitri, and we need you up here. You're the strongest." Reluctantly, Dmitri helped secure the rope around Victoria's waist. "If you tug twice, we'll pull you up right away," he instructed. "Any sign of trouble you tug, promise." Victoria nodded, touched by his concern. "I promise." The descent into the well was terrifying. The stone walls were slick with moss and old moisture, and the lantern she carried cast monstrous shadows that seemed to move independently of her. Down and down she went, the circle of sky above growing smaller, the cold intensifying with each foot. Finally, her feet touched solid ground. The well bottom was surprisingly dry, with only a small puddle in the center where water had collected from the recent rains. Victoria raised her lantern, turning slowly to examine the stone walls surrounding her. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just rough stone and more moss. But then, on the north side, a darker shadow caught her eye. Moving closer, she discovered a small recess in the wall, almost like a shelf carved into the stone. And there, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, was a bundle. Victoria's heart raced as she carefully removed the package from its hiding place. It was heavier than she expected. She was about to call up to the children when a sound froze her in place. Voices above, not the children's voices, but men's, harsh and angry. "Where is she?" a voice demanded, unfamiliar and threatening. "Gone to town," Dmitri's voice answered, defiant despite its quaver. A sharp sound, flesh striking flesh, and Katerina's cry of protest. "Don't lie to me, boy," the voice snarled. "Steinberg knows she's here. Now where?" Victoria extinguished her lantern immediately, plunging herself into absolute darkness. She tucked the package into her bodice and tugged twice on the rope, their signal for danger. But the rope suddenly went slack, falling in coils around her feet. Above, more voices, the sound of struggle. In the pitch blackness, Victoria's fingers searched the wall frantically, looking for handholds, any way to climb out, but the stones were too smooth, too slippery. She was trapped, the children in danger above, and no way to help them. Then, from the darkness to her right, came a sound, a scraping like stone against stone. Victoria pressed herself against the opposite wall, hardly daring to breathe. The scraping continued, and then a faint light appeared, not from above, but from the side of the well, a hidden passage. The light grew stronger, and with it came a figure. Ivan Petrov, lantern in hand, his face grim with purpose. "Victoria," he whispered urgently. "This way, quickly." She hesitated, suspicious. "The children." "Steinberg's men," Ivan confirmed. "But the children are safe." Widow Moldovan arrived just in time with the constable. "Now come. This tunnel won't stay secure for long." Weighing her options and finding none better, Victoria followed Ivan into the narrow passage. It was barely tall enough to stand in, roughly hewn from the earth, and supported by timber beams that groaned ominously overhead. The passage sloped upward, curving away from the well. "What is this place?" Victoria asked, her voice hushed. "Old Smuggler's Tunnel," Ivan explained, leading the way. From the Turkish wars. Mikkel and I found it as boys. Later, he connected it to the mine workings. Did Steinberg know about it? Ivan's face hardened in the lantern light. No, which is why we need to hurry, if his men find the well entrance. They emerged not at the mine as Victoria had expected, but in a small cave halfway up the ridge, concealed by thick brush. From this vantage point, they could see the cottage below, where several horses were tied outside. Men moved around the yard, their lanterns bobbing like malevolent fireflies in the falling snow. The children, Victoria gasped, starting forward, but Ivan held her back. Look, he said, pointing to the road leading to town. A wagon was moving away from the cottage. And even through the snow, Victoria could make out Dimitri's tall figure beside the driver, the smaller shapes of his siblings huddled in the back. Widow Moldovan, Ivan explained. She's taking them to her place for the night. Constable Mueller is with them. Relief washed over Victoria, quickly followed by suspicion. How do you know all this, and why were you in that tunnel? Ivan's expression was unreadable in the dim light. Because I've been watching Steinberg for weeks, and because Mikkel told me about the tunnel before he died. The telegram from Steinberg, a forgery, Ivan cut in. Planted for you to find. Steinberg wants you to distrust me. Victoria's hand went to the package still hidden in her bodice. And should I trust you, Mr. Petrov? Ivan's gaze was steady. Mikkel did, but no, you probably shouldn't, not yet. They spent the night in the cave, a small fire providing minimal warmth against the deepening cold. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. Victoria kept the package close, unwilling to examine it in Ivan's presence despite his obvious curiosity. What did you find down there? He asked finally. I don't know yet, she answered truthfully. Ivan nodded, accepting her caution. Whatever it is, it's what got Mikkel killed. Tell me what happened to him, Victoria said, the real story. Ivan stared into the fire for a long moment before responding. Official story is he was checking an old shaft in the mine, looking for salvageable timber. Support beam collapsed, caught him in the head. He looked up, meeting Victoria's eyes. But Mikkel knew those mines better than anyone. He wouldn't have been caught like that. You think Steinberg arranged it? I know he did, Ivan said grimly. 2 weeks before he died, Mikkel came to me. Said he'd found something in the old north shaft, something that changed everything. He wouldn't tell me what, just that he had proof Steinberg had been lying for years about what was really in those mountains. The shiny rocks, Victoria murmured. The twins mentioned them. Ivan's eyes sharpened. What rocks? Victoria hesitated, then decided to trust him with this much. Pavel and Maxim said their father showed them shiny rocks from the mine, said they would save the farm someday. Silver, Ivan wondered aloud. There were rumors years back, but the Assirs never found enough to be worth mining. Unless Steinberg's Assirs were lying, Victoria suggested, allowing him to buy up land cheaply while knowing what was really beneath it. Ivan nodded slowly. That would be just like him. He prodded the fire, sending sparks upward. Whatever Mikkel found, he hid it well. I've been searching for weeks. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Victoria asked. The children needed you. Pain flickered across Ivan's features. Mikkel and I, we weren't on speaking terms these past few years. I only found out about his death when I came back to warn him about Steinberg's plans for the land. He sighed heavily. I was too late for my brother. I don't intend to be too late for his children." As dawn approached, the snow tapered off, leaving a world transformed in crystalline white. Ivan extinguished their fire and stood. "We need to get to town," he said. "The meeting at the church is at noon. If Steinberg has his way, the children will be separated and placed with his allies before sundown." Victoria rose, smoothing her rumpled skirts. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Ivan's smile was grim. "That's just what Mikkel said you'd say." They made their way carefully down the ridge, avoiding the main trail where Steinberg's men might be watching. The journey to town was arduous, the snow knee-deep in places, but Victoria pushed forward relentlessly, the package secure against her heart, determination burning away her fatigue. As they reached the outskirts of Luna, Ivan touched her arm. "I can't go with you to the church," he said. "Steinberg's men will be watching for me." "Then what?" "I'll get the children from the widow's house. Meet us at the constable's office after the meeting." He hesitated. "Victoria, whatever's in that package, use it wisely. You only get one chance to turn the town against Steinberg." Victoria nodded, suddenly aware of the weight of responsibility she carried. Not just the mysterious package, but the futures of 6 children who had come to depend on her. "One more thing," Ivan said, his voice low. "Don't trust the constable entirely. Mueller owes Steinberg money." With that final warning, Ivan disappeared between the buildings, leaving Victoria alone at the edge of town, snow-covered and weary, but more determined than ever to fight for the family that fate had unexpectedly given her. The church bell tolled noon as Victoria approached the white wooden building at the center of Luna. Snow still clung to her skirts despite her attempts to brush it away, and her hands were red and chapped from cold. She had stopped only briefly at Widow Moldovan's house, relieved to find the children safe, but concerned by Dmitri's feverish appearance. The boy had insisted on coming with her to the meeting, but Victoria had firmly refused, telling him to rest and watch over his siblings. "Remember," she had told him, pressing a quick kiss to his burning forehead, "you're their protector when I'm not there." Now, as she climbed the church steps, Victoria could feel the weight of stares from the townspeople already gathered inside. Conversations hushed as she entered, and a path cleared before her as she walked down the aisle. At the front of the church stood Father Dumitru, flanked by the town council members, and most prominently, Baron Otto Steinberg himself. Victoria had never met the man, but she recognized him instantly. Tall and imposing in an expensive black coat with silver buttons, his gray beard perfectly groomed and cold eyes that assessed her as one might evaluate a piece of livestock. This was a man accustomed to power and unused to opposition. "Miss Ashford," Father Dumitru acknowledged her, his tone suggesting she was late, though the final bell was still echoing. "We were just discussing the Petrov children." "I'm sure you were," Victoria replied, her voice carrying in the hushed church. "And I'm here to ensure that discussion includes their rightful guardian." A murmur ran through the congregation. Baron Steinberg stepped forward, offering a smile that never reached his eyes. "Miss Ashford, isn't it? The mail-order bride who never married." His voice was smooth as polished stone. "A tragic situation, to be sure, but you must understand, without legal standing." "My standing comes from Mikhail Petrov himself," Victoria interrupted, reaching into her bodice to withdraw the package she'd found in the well. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped the oilcloth, but her voice remained steady. Before his death, Mr. Petrov made provisions for his children. Inside the package was a leather-bound journal, a folded document bearing an official seal, and a small pouch that clinked softly as she set it on the pulpit. Victoria opened the document first, scanning it quickly before holding it up. This is a properly filed deed to the Petrov property, registered in Brasov and bearing the county seal. It shows that Mikhail Petrov owned his land outright, with no outstanding debts to Valia Luna Mining or any other entity. Steinberg's expression hardened. That's impossible. Petrov borrowed heavily against that property. Did he? Victoria countered, opening the journal to a marked page. According to his records, all debts were paid in full last spring. He has receipts documented here, witnessed by the county clerk. She turned to face the congregation. Baron Steinberg has been claiming debts that don't exist, attempting to steal land from orphaned children through fraud and intimidation. The murmurs grew louder. Steinberg's face darkened with anger, but before he could respond, the church doors burst open. Constable Mueller entered, supporting a pale, sweating Dmitri Petrov. Boy insisted on coming, the constable explained gruffly. Said he had something to say. Victoria rushed to Dmitri's side, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin. You should be in bed, she scolded gently. Dmitri shook his head stubbornly. Had to come, had to tell them about Papa. The church fell silent as Dmitri faced the congregation, his young voice strained but determined. My Papa wasn't killed in no accident. He was murdered because he found silver in our mine. Silver Baron Steinberg has been hiding from everyone in this town while buying up their land for pennies. Gasps and exclamations filled the church. Steinberg stepped forward, his face a mask of outrage. This is absurd. The boy is clearly delirious with fever, making wild accusations. Not so wild, Victoria interjected, opening the small pouch from the package. She tipped it onto the pulpit, and several chunks of gleaming silver ore rolled out, catching the light from the church windows. Mikhail Petrov found these in what Steinberg claimed was an exhausted mine. There's more where this came from, much more, according to his journal. The town council members leaned forward, eyes fixed on the silver. Father Dumitru looked uncertainly between Victoria and Steinberg. Even if this is true, the priest said slowly, it doesn't address the matter of the children's guardianship. Without a legal parent or guardian. There's this as well, Victoria said, withdrawing a final document from the journal. Mikhail Petrov's last will and testament, properly witnessed and signed the day before his death. In it, he names me, Victoria Ashford, as guardian to his children and executor of his estate. She looked around the church, her gaze steady. Should I accept the responsibility? She looked around the church. I accept. Before Steinberg could protest further, Dmitri suddenly collapsed against the constable, his face alarmingly pale beneath the flush of fever. Dmitri, Victoria cried, catching him as he slumped to the floor. His skin burned against hers, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. Meeting's over, Constable Mueller announced, helping Victoria lift the boy. This child needs a doctor. But as they carried Dmitri from the church, Victoria realized with growing horror that the boy's illness wasn't isolated. When they reached Widow Moldovan's house, they found chaos. Katerina was trying desperately to cool Lizaveta's burning forehead with wet cloths, while the twins lay listless on pallets before the fire. Only Anya and baby Vera seemed unaffected. "Started this morning," Widow Moldovan explained anxiously. "Thought it was just Dmitri, but then Lizaveta began coughing something terrible, and the twins complained of headaches. Never seen fever come on so fast." Dr. Peterson, summoned from his home down the street, examined each child with grave concern. "Mountain fever," he pronounced finally. "Nasty strain. Been seeing cases all through the county this winter." "Will they recover?" Victoria asked, her voice tight with fear. The doctor hesitated, glancing at Dimitri's still form. "Hard to say. The boy's the worst. His lungs are congested and the fever's dangerously high. The others might pull through with proper care, but him," he shook his head. "I'll leave medicine, but prepare yourself, Miss Ashford. Children can slip away quickly with this fever." After the doctor left, Victoria organized the small house for the crisis ahead. She moved the sickest children, Dmitri and Lizaveta, nearest the fire, arranged for the twins to share a pallet where she could monitor them easily, and set Katerina to watching baby Vera, while Anya silently helped wherever needed. The afternoon stretched into evening, and evening into night. Victoria worked tirelessly, spooning broth and medicine into reluctant mouths, applying cold compresses to burning foreheads, changing sweat-soaked bedding. Widow Moldovan helped for hours before her own age, and exhaustion forced her to rest. Around midnight, Ivan slipped into the house, his face grave when he saw the children. "How bad?" he asked softly, coming to stand beside Victoria as she bathed Dimitri's face with cool water. "Bad," she admitted, not looking up. "The doctor doesn't think Dmitri will." She couldn't finish the sentence. Ivan knelt beside her, his hand covering hers briefly. "He's Mikkel's son. He'll fight." But as the night deepened, Dimitri's breathing became more labored, his thin chest struggling for each breath. Lizaveta developed the same rattling cough, and the twins' fevers spiked alarmingly. Victoria moved between them ceaselessly, her own exhaustion forgotten in the desperate battle against the illness consuming the children she had come to love. Dawn was breaking when Dmitri suddenly seized her hand, his eyes flying open with startling clarity. "Miss Victoria," he gasped, "I saw Papa. He was in the tunnel." Victoria pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "SHH, Dmitri, save your strength." "No," he insisted, his voice surprisingly strong. "He showed me something in the north shaft, something important." His eyes began to drift closed again, his momentary lucidity fading. "He said to tell you, look where the canary died." With those cryptic words, Dmitri slipped back into unconsciousness, his breathing even more labored than before. Victoria looked up to find Ivan watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "The north shaft," Ivan murmured. "Mikkel was found near there." "What does he mean about a canary?" Victoria asked, desperate for any hope to cling to. "Miners used canaries to detect bad air," Ivan explained. "There was a marker in the north shaft where a canary died back in '72. Mikkel and I used it as a meeting spot when we were boys." His eyes met Victoria's. There might be something there, something that could help. "With the children this sick, I can't leave," Victoria said, torn between her duty to the ailing children and the tantalizing possibility of finding something that might save them all. "I'll go," Ivan offered. "You stay with them." But Lizaveta chose that moment to start convulsing, her small body arching off the pallet as the fever seized her completely. Victoria called for help, and Ivan rushed to her side. Together, they held the little girl until the seizure passed, leaving her limp and barely breathing. "She needs more than the doctor's medicine," Victoria said desperately. "They all do," Widow Moldovan, awakened by the commotion, shuffled into the room. "There's a gypsy woman outside Sibiu," she offered hesitantly. "Some folks say she has remedies the doctors don't know about. Saved my nephew's boy last winter when the doctor had given up hope." Victoria glanced at Ivan, who nodded gravely. "Worth trying," he said, "but Sibiu's 20 miles in the snow." "I'll go," Victoria decided suddenly. "You know the mine better. You search the north shaft. Widow Moldovan can watch the children who aren't as sick." "In this weather," Ivan protested, "it's too dangerous." "More dangerous than watching these children die," Victoria countered, already reaching for her coat. "I won't sit by and lose them, not when there's even a small chance." The journey to Sibiu was harrowing. Snow had drifted to waist height in places, and the bitter wind cut through Victoria's clothes like knives. Her horse struggled through the drifts, sometimes stopping entirely, until she dismounted and led him forward through the deepest snow. By the time she reached the outskirts of Sibiu, Victoria's feet were numb, her face raw from the wind, and exhaustion dragged at her every step. Finding the gypsy healer took precious hours more. Cautious questioning of shopkeepers, and finally, a wary escort by a local woman to a small caravan beyond the town limits. The healer, a stoic, weathered woman who called herself only Vadoma, listened to Victoria's desperate plea, then wordlessly began gathering herbs and roots from various containers around her ornate wagon. "Lung fever," she pronounced as she worked. "Bad this year, many children lost already." "Please," Victoria begged. "I can't lose them. They've already lost so much." Vadoma's dark eyes studied her for a long moment. "Not your children by birth." "No," Victoria admitted, "but mine by heart now." Something in Vadoma's stern expression softened. She handed Victoria a bundle of herbs and a small clay jar of strong-smelling salve. "For chest, make steam tent with herbs. Rub salve where they breathe. Fever will break, or they will go to ancestors. Nothing more I can do." The return journey was even worse. A new storm had blown in, reducing visibility to mere feet, and turning the trail into a treacherous maze of drifts and hidden obstacles. Twice Victoria's horse nearly foundered, and once she herself fell into snow so deep she feared she wouldn't be able to climb out. Night had fallen by the time she staggered back into Valia Luna, the precious remedies clutched to her chest. The lights of Widow Moldovan's house guided her the final distance, a beacon in the swirling white darkness. She burst through the door to find a scene of even greater crisis than when she'd left. Dmitri lay utterly still, his face waxy white, while Ivan bent over him, desperately trying to coax air into the boy's lungs. Katerina sobbed quietly in the corner, holding Lizaveta, whose tiny chest barely moved with each shallow breath. The twins were no better, their faces flushed with fever, their eyes glazed and unseeing. "Victoria," Ivan's voice broke with relief. "Thank God, he stopped breathing twice in the last hour." Without wasting a moment, Victoria set to work. Following Vadoma's instructions, she created a steam tent over Dmitri and Lizaveta using blankets and the boiling herbs, which filled the room with a pungent, medicinal scent. She rubbed the salve onto their chests and backs, massaging it into their skin while murmuring encouragements and prayers. Through the night they worked, Victoria and Ivan taking turns applying the remedies to each child, forcing spoonfuls of herbal tea between cracked lips, fighting death back one breath at a time. Widow Moldovan joined them, her old hands steady as she helped bathe fevered bodies in cool water. As dawn approached, baby Vera began to fuss, her cries growing more insistent. Victoria, exhausted beyond measure, reached for her automatically and then froze in horror. The baby's skin burned against her hands. The fever had claimed her too. "No," she whispered, gathering the infant close. "No, no, no, not you too, little one. Please, not you too." Vera's cries weakened to whimpers, then stopped entirely. Her tiny body went limp in Victoria's arms, her breathing so faint she had to press her ear to the baby's chest to hear it. In that moment, as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the frosted windows, Victoria Ashford, who had come to Valia Luna as a mail-order bride seeking a new beginning, found herself on her knees in the middle of a room filled with dying children, holding a fevered infant to her heart and facing the most devastating choice of her life. The third day of the fever brought a momentary respite. By mid-morning, the twins' temperatures had dropped slightly, and Lizavetta's breathing had eased from the terrifying rattle to a more regular, if still labored, rhythm. Even baby Vera showed faint signs of improvement, taking a few swallows of watered-down goat's milk before drifting back to her fitful sleep. Only Dmitri remained unchanged, suspended in the shadowy place between life and death. His chest rose and fell in shallow movements, each breath a battle that left Victoria wondering if it would be his last. She hadn't left his side in hours, her voice hoarse from the stories and songs she whispered to him, desperate to give him something to follow back to the world of the living. "You need rest," Ivan told her, placing a cup of strong coffee beside her. "You'll be no good to any of them if you collapse." Victoria shook her head. "I can't leave him, not now." Ivan's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. "I found something in the mine, at the canary marker." This caught her attention. She looked up, hope flickering in her exhausted eyes. "What?" "A strongbox," Ivan said, lowering his voice. "Hidden in a crevice in the rock. Inside was evidence, papers, assay reports, letters between Steinberg and mining officials in Brasov." His expression hardened. "Proof that Steinberg has been systematically defrauding everyone in the county. The silver vein runs deeper than anyone suspected. And Steinberg falsified reports to buy land cheap before the owners discovered its true value. That's why he wanted the Petrov property so badly," Victoria realized. "One of the reasons," Ivan agreed grimly. "The main shaft of the vein runs directly beneath this land. It's worth a fortune." Victoria's gaze returned to Dmitri's still face. "None of that matters if these children don't survive." Ivan hesitated. "There's more. Constable Mueller came by while you were tending to the baby. Steinberg's disputing the will, claiming it's a forgery. He's filed papers in Brasov to have the children declared wards of the county under his guardianship." "He can't do that," Victoria protested. "We have the will." "Which has to be validated by a judge," Ivan finished. "The circuit judge won't be through for another month, but Steinberg's got a magistrate in his pocket who's willing to issue a temporary ruling. Mueller says they'll come for the children as soon as they're well enough to be moved." Anger flared through Victoria's exhaustion. "I won't let that happen." "It gets worse," Ivan continued reluctantly. "Steinberg's also claiming that you're unfit, that your negligence caused the children's illness. He's suggesting you kept them in unsafe conditions at the cottage. Victoria felt as if she'd been struck. That's absurd. Half the children in town have the fever. Steinberg doesn't care about truth, Ivan said bitterly. He just needs a story that people will believe long enough for him to get legal control of the land. Widow Moldovan appeared in the doorway, her usually stoic face creased with worry. "There's a man outside," she announced. "Says he's a magistrate from the county seat. Has papers for Miss Ashford." Victoria rose unsteadily, her legs cramped from hours of sitting beside Dmitri. "I'll speak with him." The magistrate, a thin, nervous man with a perpetual cough, stood awkwardly in the front room, official-looking documents clutched in his gloved hands. His eyes darted around, refusing to meet Victoria's direct gaze. "Miss Ashford," he began, "I have here a writ of temporary guardianship for the Petrov miners, transferring their care to Baron Otto Steinberg, until such time as the circuit court can make a final determination." He thrust the papers toward her. "The children are to be moved to Baron Steinberg's home as soon as their health permits." Victoria didn't take the papers. "These children are gravely ill, sir. They cannot be moved." "I understand," the magistrate said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Baron Steinberg has arranged for a private physician to attend them at his residence. They'll receive the finest care." "They're receiving the finest care now," Victoria countered. "From me." The magistrate's discomfort visibly increased. "There are concerns, Miss Ashford, about your suitability as a guardian. You have no legal relationship to these children, no experience as a mother, and limited financial resources. Baron Steinberg can provide advantages you simply cannot. I have Mikhail Petrovs will naming me their guardian," Victoria said firmly. "A document whose authenticity is in question," the magistrate replied, gaining confidence as he moved to legal ground. "Until the circuit judge can rule on its validity, the children's welfare must be the primary consideration. Baron Steinberg is a respected businessman with considerable resources. Baron Steinberg is the man responsible for their father's death," Ivan interjected, stepping forward. "And I have proof." The magistrate's face paled. "That's a serious accusation, sir." "With serious evidence to back it," Ivan replied. "Evidence the federal marshal in Brasov would be very interested to see." A tense silence filled the room. Finally, the magistrate cleared his throat. "Regardless, these papers are legally binding until overturned by a higher court. The children will be removed to Baron Steinberg's care within 3 days, assuming their health allows." He placed the documents on a side table. "Good day." After he left, Victoria sank into a chair, her strength finally deserting her. 3 days, she whispered. "We have 3 days to save them from the fever and from Steinberg." "We need to get the evidence to the federal marshal," Ivan said. "The strongbox from the mine has enough to bring charges against Steinberg. Once he's under investigation, his claim on the children will be worthless." Victoria nodded wearily. "You should go. Take the evidence to Brasov immediately." "I can't leave you alone to face Steinberg," Ivan protested. "The children need me here," Victoria said. "And we need that marshal. It's our only chance." Reluctantly, Ivan agreed. He would leave at nightfall, traveling cross-country to avoid Steinberg's men who were surely watching the main roads. With luck, he could reach Brasov in 2 days, find the marshal, and return before Steinberg could execute his plan. But fate had other ideas. As dusk approached and Ivan prepared to leave, Dimitri's condition suddenly worsened. His breathing became erratic, and fresh blood appeared on his lips with each rattling cough. Victoria and Ivan worked desperately to ease his breathing, propping him up, applying more of Vadoma's salve, creating a fresh steam tent. Nothing helped. The boy was drowning in the fluid filling his lungs, his face taking on a terrifying blue tinge as he fought for each breath. "Go," Victoria told Ivan during a momentary lull in the crisis. "We're losing time." Ivan hesitated, torn between his mission and the dying boy. "If I leave now, if you don't leave now, Steinberg wins," Victoria said firmly. Even if Dimitri, she couldn't finish the sentence. As if hearing his name, Dimitri's eyes suddenly fluttered open, focusing briefly on Victoria's face. His cracked lips moved, forming words too faint to hear. Victoria leaned closer. "Papa's waiting," Dimitri whispered, "in the tunnel." A chill ran through Victoria that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "No, Dimitri," she said fiercely. "You stay with me. Your father can wait." But Dimitri's eyes were already drifting closed again, his breathing becoming more labored by the second. Ivan squeezed Victoria's shoulder once, then slipped out the door into the gathering darkness, the precious evidence secured inside his coat. Left alone with the dying boy, Victoria did the only thing she could think of. She climbed onto the narrow pallet beside him, gathered his frail body in her arms, and began to sing the lullabies her own mother had sung to her as a child. Through her tears, through the night, through what seemed like endless hours of Dimitri's desperate struggle for breath, she sang. Outside, a new storm descended on Valia Luna, shrouding the town in whirling white. The wind howled around the eaves of Widow Moldovan's house, rattling windows and sending snow cascading down the chimney to hiss in the fire. It was as if the mountain itself was in anguish, mirroring the battle being waged in the small room where a woman who had come to be a bride was instead becoming something else entirely. A mother willing to fight death itself for her children. Dawn was still hours away when Dimitri suddenly stiffened in Victoria's arms, drew one shuddering breath, and went still. "No," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. "No, Dimitri, please, no." But the boy didn't respond. His face, so tormented in fever, had gone slack, his chest motionless under her trembling hand. In that moment of utter despair, with the storm raging outside and 4 other sick children depending on her, Victoria Ashford faced the most devastating loss since the death of her young charge years before. And somewhere on the storm-lashed road to Brasov, Ivan Petrov fought his own battle against the elements, unaware that time had already run out for the boy who had never trusted him. Victoria felt Dimitri's body grow cold in her arms as the night stretched endlessly around her. Yet she couldn't bring herself to let go, couldn't accept that the fierce, protective boy who had greeted her at the river port was truly gone. Outside, the storm raged with undiminished fury, as if nature itself shared her grief. A soft touch on her shoulder finally broke through her stupor. Anya stood beside the bed, her solemn eyes fixed on her brother's still face. "He's not gone," the child whispered. "Not really." Victoria tried to form a gentle response, some comforting lie to ease the girl's pain, but Anya continued before she could speak. "Papa's with him. They're in the tunnel together." A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room ran through Victoria. Anya, sweetheart, you need to. Go there, Anya insisted, her voice taking on an urgency Victoria had never heard from the quiet child. Now, before it's too late. Victoria glanced toward the other children. The twins, still feverish but sleeping. Lizaveta, breathing more easily. Baby Vera, fussing weakly in Katerina's arms. I can't leave the others. You must, Anya said with uncanny certainty. Dmitri is waiting at the place where the water meets the stone. Before Victoria could question her further, a commotion erupted outside. The sound of horses approaching, men's voices raised against the howling wind. Widow Moldovan hurried into the room, her face drawn with fear. It's Steinberg, she said breathlessly. With the constable and his men, they've come for the children. They can't move sick children in this storm, Victoria protested, gently laying Dmitri back on the bed and covering his face with a sheet. The simple act nearly broke her, but she forced herself to stand, to face this new threat. They're saying the fever's past, Widow Moldovan explained hurriedly, that it's safer for the children at Steinberg's house than here. Through the window, Victoria could see lanterns bobbing in the swirling snow, moving steadily closer to the house. There was no time to grieve, no time even to properly arrange Dmitri's body. She had to protect the others. Take Katerina and the children out the back way, she instructed the widow. Go to Father Dumitru. Whatever his faults, he won't let Steinberg remove dying children in this weather. What about you? The widow asked. Victoria's gaze fell on Anya, who was staring at her with those unnervingly knowing eyes. I'm going to the mine. In this storm, you'll freeze to death. Better that than let Steinberg win, Victoria said grimly. She knelt before Anya. Can you guide the widow and your brothers and sisters? Keep them safe until I return. Anya nodded solemnly. Dmitri is waiting, she repeated. Hurry. Minutes later, bundled in every layer she could find, and with Mikkel's journal tucked securely inside her coat, Victoria slipped out the back door of the widow's house. The storm enveloped her immediately, the wind stealing her breath and the snow blinding her. She oriented herself toward the mountain, where the abandoned mine entrance waited like a dark mouth in the white landscape. The journey was nightmarish. Every step was a battle against knee-deep snow and wind that threatened to knock her off her feet. The cold penetrated her layers, numbing her fingers and toes, then creeping inexorably toward her core. Twice she fell, and the second time, lying in the snow with exhaustion dragging at her limbs. The temptation to close her eyes was nearly overwhelming. It would be so easy to rest, just for a moment, to join Dmitri and Mikkel in whatever peace they had found. But the faces of the other children floated before her. Katerina's determined strength, the twins' mischievous smiles, Lizaveta's trusting eyes, baby Vera's reaching hands, and Anya's knowing gaze. They needed her. They were counting on her. With a supreme effort, Victoria forced herself back to her feet and staggered onward. The mine entrance loomed suddenly out of the white void, a black hollow in the mountainside, partially blocked by old timbers. Victoria stumbled toward it, her frozen fingers clumsy as she pushed aside the rotting wood barricade. Inside, the air was still and surprisingly warm compared to the howling maelstrom outside. Victoria paused, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness. The main tunnel stretched before her, supported by timber beams at regular intervals, disappearing into blackness. Without a lantern, she would have to feel her way forward, guided only by the rough walls and her desperate need to understand Anya's cryptic message. "Dmitri," she called, her voice echoing eerily in the confined space. "Dmitri, I'm here." Only silence answered her. Deeper into the mine she went, one careful step at a time, the darkness thickening around her. The air grew heavier, with an underlying scent of dampness and decay. Water dripped somewhere ahead, the steady plink-plink creating an eerie cadence to her advance. How far had she come? How much farther to the north shaft where the canary had died? In the absolute darkness, distance became meaningless. Time stretched and contracted unpredictably. Victoria's mind began to play tricks on her, filling the shadows with movement, the silence with whispers. Then impossibly, she saw a light ahead. A faint bluish glow that seemed to emanate from the rock itself. Victoria moved toward it, drawn like a moth to flame, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The tunnel widened into a chamber where the ceiling had partially collapsed, allowing a shaft of dim daylight to penetrate from above. In this ghostly illumination, Victoria could make out crude markings on the wall. A simple cross with the etched outline of a bird beneath it, the canary marker. And there, slumped against the wall beneath the symbol, was a figure. "Dmitri," Victoria gasped, rushing forward. But it wasn't Dmitri. It was Ivan Petrov, blood matting his hair, his face deathly pale in the strange light. "Victoria," he whispered as she knelt beside him. "Knew you'd come." "What happened?" she asked, examining his head wound with gentle fingers. "The storm. I thought you were on your way to Brasov." "Never made it out of town," Ivan grimaced. "Steinberg's men jumped me at the edge of town, took the strongbox, would have killed me outright, but I managed to get away. Knew I had to hide the evidence somewhere they wouldn't look." "So you came to the mine," Victoria finished for him. "But how did you get through the storm?" "Same way you did," he said with a weak attempt at a smile. "Pure stubbornness." His expression sobered. "Dmitri." Victoria shook her head, unable to speak past the sudden knot in her throat. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, grief etching deeper lines in his already haggard face. "I'm sorry, Victoria. The boy deserved better." "They all do," she said softly. "Which is why we need to find whatever you hid and get it to the authorities before Steinberg can take the other children." Ivan nodded toward the far wall of the chamber, behind the loose stone. "But Victoria, there's something you need to know first. Something about me, about my relationship with Mikko." A scuffing sound from the tunnel entrance interrupted him. They both froze, listening intently as footsteps approached, accompanied by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "Well, well," came Baron Steinberg's voice from the shadows. "What a touching reunion." He stepped into the chamber, a lantern in one hand, a revolver in the other. Behind him loomed two of his men, similarly armed. "I must admit, Miss Ashford, you've proven more resourceful than I anticipated," Steinberg continued conversationally. "Most mail-order brides would have fled back to Vienna at the first sign of trouble. Instead, here you are, conspiring with a known criminal in an abandoned mine." He shook his head in mock disapproval. Hardly the behavior of a suitable guardian for impressionable children. Victoria rose slowly to her feet, positioning herself between Ivan and Steinberg. "The only criminal here is you," she said steadily. "We know what you did to Mikhail Petrov. We know about the silver." Steinberg's smile never reached his cold eyes. "Accusations from a desperate woman and a drifter. Who do you think the authorities will believe? The respected businessman who's generously offered to care for orphan children, or the spinster who let one of them die under her care? The casual cruelty of his words struck Victoria like a physical blow, but she refused to show it. The truth has a way of coming out, Baron Steinberg. Perhaps, he conceded, but you won't be around to see it. He gestured to his men. Search him. Find whatever he hid. As the men moved toward Ivan, a small figure darted suddenly from the tunnel entrance. Dmitri Petrov, pale as death, but undeniably, impossibly alive, his nightshirt billowing ghost-like in the dim light. Dmitri, Victoria cried, disbelieving joy surging through her. The boy ignored her, his focus entirely on Steinberg. You killed my papa, he said, his young voice echoing in the chamber. Shot him right here and left him to die. Steinberg's composure slipped for the first time. You're dead, he whispered, the gun in his hand wavering slightly. The widow sent word. Not dead, Dmitri replied. Just waiting like Papa told me to. From behind Dmitri emerged a second figure. Constable Mueller, his expression grim, his own gun trained steadily on Steinberg. That's enough, Otto, the constable said quietly. I heard it all. Your confession at the house when you thought no one was listening. Your orders to your men just now. It's over. Steinberg's face contorted with rage. You fool. Do you know how much money is at stake here? Enough to make us all rich beyond imagination. The silver vein beneath this worthless farm is just the beginning. Worth killing for? The constable asked. Worth anything, Steinberg snarled. With sudden violence, he swung his gun toward Dmitri. If I'm finished, so is the last Petrov boy. Several things happened simultaneously. Victoria lunged toward Dmitri. Ivan launched himself at Steinberg despite his injuries, and Constable Mueller fired. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space, reverberating off the stone walls and setting loose a shower of dirt and small rocks from the unstable ceiling. When the echoes faded, Steinberg lay crumpled on the ground, his unseeing eyes fixed on the shaft of daylight above, a dark stain spreading across his expensive coat. Victoria gathered Dmitri into her arms, her mind still struggling to accept his presence. How? She whispered against his hair. I felt you die. I did, Dmitri said simply. But Papa wasn't ready for me yet. He said I had to come back because you needed me, because you were the mother we'd been waiting for. Constable Mueller cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional scene. The boy showed up at my door half frozen, raving about his papa and the mine. Thought it was fever talk, but something made me listen. Good thing, too. He nodded toward Steinberg's still form. Been suspecting for years, but never had proof. There's proof, Ivan said, grimacing as he pulled himself to a sitting position. In the wall there, everything Mikkel documented before he was killed. As Constable Mueller retrieved the hidden evidence, Victoria held Dmitri close, marveling at his warm, living presence. Don't you ever scare me like that again, she scolded gently. Dmitri looked up at her, his eyes older than his years, but now holding something new. Trust, and perhaps even the beginning of love. Does this mean you're staying for real? Victoria smiled through her tears. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. You're stuck with me now, Dmitri Petrov. You and your brothers and sisters, for as long as you'll have me. Forever then, Dmitri decided with the absolute certainty of childhood. Papa said you were meant to be our mother, and Papa was always right about the important things. Spring came gently to Velia Luna that year, as if nature itself was being careful with the town's fragile recovery. The Petrov homestead, perched on its ridge overlooking the valley, bloomed with new life. A freshly painted porch, curtains in windows that had been bare for years, a garden stretching toward the morning sun, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the breeze. 1 year had passed since Victoria Ashford stepped off the river barge, expecting to meet her husband-to-be, and instead found 6 orphaned children and a mystery that nearly cost them everything. Now, on a bright May morning, she stood on that same porch, watching Dmitri and the twins construct an elaborate system of waterways in the mud beside the new well. "Don't get too filthy," she called. "Remember, we're going into town later." Dmitri waved acknowledgement without looking up, his attention fixed on damming a particularly rebellious stream with stones. At 11, he had grown taller and stronger in the past year, the sickly pallor of fever replaced by the healthy tan of a boy who spent his days in the sun. The nightmares that had plagued him after their ordeal in the mine had gradually faded, though he still occasionally woke calling for his father. Victoria understood those dreams all too well. She had her own vivid recreations of that terrible night when Dmitri had seemed lost to them forever, when Steinberg's evil had nearly triumphed. But like Dmitri, she had learned to face the morning light with renewed purpose, grateful for the family that fate had unexpectedly given her. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where Ivan Petrov approached on his chestnut mare. He dismounted with the easy grace that had become familiar over the months of his regular visits, tipping his hat to Victoria with a smile that still made her heart skip like a schoolgirl's. "Beautiful day," he remarked, climbing the porch steps to join her. "Perfect for a celebration," Victoria agreed. "The children are beside themselves with excitement." Ivan's expression softened as he glanced toward the playing boys. "They deserve it, all of you do." Today was no ordinary day in Velia Luna. It was the day the circuit judge would officially approve Victoria's adoption of all 6 Petrov children, making legal what had long since been settled in their hearts. The town was preparing a celebration afterward, a far cry from the suspicious whispers and cold shoulders of a year ago. "Any word on the mine?" Victoria asked, offering Ivan a glass of lemonade from the pitcher Katerina had prepared that morning. "The new company started hiring," Ivan confirmed. "Proper safety measures this time. Fair wages. The federal investigation into Steinberg's affairs has scared the new owners into exemplary behavior." He smiled wryly. "Amazing what the threat of prison will do for business ethics." The exposure of Baron Steinberg's crimes had sent shock waves through the county. The evidence Mikhail Petrov had gathered before his murder, the falsified assay reports, the threatening letters to landowners, the bribes to officials had revealed a conspiracy stretching back years. With Steinberg dead and his accomplices facing prosecution, the rich silver deposits he had tried to steal were now being legitimately developed, bringing new prosperity to the struggling region. "Will you take the foreman position they offered?" Victoria asked, watching Ivan's face carefully. He hesitated. "I'm considering it. It would mean staying in Velia Luna permanently." "The children would like that," Victoria said softly. "They've grown fond of their uncle." Ivan's eyes met hers. "Just the children." Before Victoria could answer, Katerina appeared in the doorway, baby Vera balanced on her hip. At nearly 2, she was a sturdy little girl with her father's determined chin and her own unique talent for mischief. "Lizaveta's having trouble with her dress buttons," Katerina reported, "and Anya can't find her good shoes." Victoria sighed. "I'll be right there." She turned back to Ivan. "Duty calls. Will you keep an eye on the mud engineers while I sort out the wardrobe disasters?" "With pleasure," he agreed, his hand briefly touching hers as she passed, a small gesture that spoke volumes about their evolving relationship. Inside the cottage that had once been so barren and cheerless now hummed with life and warmth. Mikkel's original one-room structure had been expanded over the past year, with Ivan and the townsmen helping to add 2 proper bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Colorful quilts brightened the beds, drawings and pressed flowers decorated the walls, and bookshelves lined one corner where Victoria conducted daily lessons. Lizaveta, now 5 and fully recovered from her brush with death, sat on her bed in a pretty blue dress, struggling with the tiny buttons. "They won't go in the holes," she complained as Victoria knelt to help her. "Patience," Victoria advised, deftly securing the troublesome fastenings. "Some things can't be rushed. Like healing," she thought, like trust, like the slow, cautious love that had grown between her and the children, and more recently between her and Ivan Petrov. The truth about Ivan had emerged gradually in the aftermath of the confrontation at the mine. He wasn't Mikkel's brother by blood, but his closest friend since childhood. They had fallen out years earlier over Ivan's wild ways and questionable associations, including a brief period working for Steinberg himself. When rumors of Mikkel's discovery in the mine reached him, Ivan had returned to warn his friend, only to arrive too late. His guilt over that failure had driven him to protect Mikkel's children at all costs, even if it meant allowing them to believe he was their uncle, rather than a man their father had once disowned. The deception had weighed on him, but in the end, the truth had strengthened rather than damaged the bonds forming between them all. Anya appeared in the doorway, barefoot, but otherwise ready in her best dress, her hair neatly braided. At 8, she still spoke rarely, but her silence no longer carried the eerie quality that had once unnerved the townspeople. She simply observed more than she spoke, her thoughtful eyes taking in everything around her. "Your shoes are under Katerina's bed," Victoria told her with a knowing smile. "Where you left them after trying them on yesterday." Anya nodded and disappeared to retrieve them, returning moments later, fully dressed and ready. "Do you think Papa would be proud?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft but clear. Victoria's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Very proud," she assured the girl, "of all of you." An hour later, the Petrov family, for that was truly what they had become, made their way into Velia Luna in the wagon Ivan had brought for the occasion. The town had been transformed for the celebration, with bunting strung between buildings and tables set up in the churchyard for the feast to follow the ceremony. As they approached, Victoria was struck by how different this reception was from her first lonely arrival. Townspeople called greetings, women waved from porches, and even Father Dumitru, who had once questioned her fitness as a guardian, stood ready to welcome them at the church steps. The adoption ceremony itself was brief, but deeply moving. Judge Antonscu, a kind-faced man with silver hair, had Victoria sign the necessary documents, and then had each child, even baby Vera, make their mark or signature as appropriate. When he officially proclaimed them a legal family in the eyes of the law, spontaneous applause broke out among the gathered witnesses. "You have created something remarkable here, Miss Ashford," the judge told her privately afterward. "These children were on the verge of being scattered to the winds, their inheritance stolen. Now they have a home, a future, and most importantly, a mother who would move heaven and earth for them." "They gave me as much as I gave them," Victoria replied, watching as the children joined the celebration, accepting congratulations and treats from the same townspeople who had once whispered about curses and impropriety. "They made me whole again when I thought that was impossible." As the festivities continued into the afternoon, Ivan found Victoria sitting quietly on a bench beneath the church's ancient oak tree, observing her children's happiness from a slight distance. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. Victoria smiled. "I was thinking about that letter, the one that brought me here. It promised everything I thought I wanted: a home, a husband, security." She looked out at the children, Dmitri showing off his pocket knife to admiring friends, Katerina dancing with the minister's daughter, the twins competing to see who could eat more pie, Lizaveta collecting flowers, Anya reading quietly to baby Vera in her lap. "Instead, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for," she continued softly. "A family that needed exactly what I had to give." Ivan's hand found hers, warm and steady. Mikhail would be pleased with how it all turned out. He always did have a knack for seeing the heart of things. "There's one thing missing," Victoria said, gathering her courage to address what had remained unspoken between them for months. "The children have a mother now, but they could use a father. I was wondering when you might get around to that particular detail." Ivan finished for her, his eyes crinkling with gentle humor. Victoria laughed, the sound as bright and clear as the spring day around them. "I believe that's supposed to be your line, Mr. Petrov." Ivan's expression grew serious as he took both her hands in his. "Victoria Ashford, I'm not the man Mikhail was. I've made mistakes, some of them serious ones. But this past year, watching you fight for these children, seeing the home you've built from nothing but love and determination, it's made me want to be better, to be worthy of being part of what you've created." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver band. "I'm not asking to replace Mikhail in anyone's memory, but if you'll have me, I'd consider it the greatest honor of my life to help you raise these children and to call you my wife." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at the man offering it. Not the husband she had traveled across the country to marry, but perhaps the one she had been meant to find all along. "Yes," she said simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. As Ivan slipped the ring onto her finger, a shout went up from nearby. They turned to see Dmitri watching them, his face split in a wide grin. Before they could react, he was running toward the other children, calling out the news at the top of his lungs. Within moments, they were surrounded by their family. Katerina crying happy tears, the twins jumping with excitement, Lizaveta demanding to see the ring, Anya smiling her rare, luminous smile, and baby Vera reaching up to be held. The mail-order bride who had arrived to find 6 children and no husband had become something far greater than a wife. She had become a mother who had fought death itself for her children, a guardian who had protected their inheritance against impossible odds. And now, at last, a woman who had found love in the most unexpected of places. As the family embraced, laughing and talking all at once, Victoria caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the edge of the churchyard. Widow Moldovan, her weathered face creased in a satisfied smile. "Just as it should be," the old woman called, raising her hand in blessing. "Just as Mikkel hoped when he wrote that letter calling you here." And in that perfect moment, with her children around her and her future husband by her side, Victoria Ashford, who had once been so alone in the world, knew that she had finally, truly come home. Life has a way of sending us down unexpected paths, doesn't it? When Victoria stepped off that river barge, she wasn't looking to become a mother to 6 orphan children. She was seeking the security of marriage. Instead, she found her true calling in the eyes of those who needed her most. I think that's something many of us understand as we look back on our own journeys. The plans we carefully laid often gave way to something we never could have imagined. Sometimes harder, yes, but ultimately more meaningful. Victoria's story reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood or marriage certificates. It's built through countless small acts of sacrifice and love. Staying up all night with a sick child, fighting against impossible odds to protect what's yours, finding the courage to begin again when life has dealt you crushing blows. As we enter this season of our lives, many of us have become the elders, the keepers of our family stories. Like Victoria, we've weathered storms we didn't see coming, lost people we couldn't bear to lose, and still found the strength to create homes where love abounds. Perhaps that's the greatest legacy any of us can leave. Not wealth or property, but the unwavering certainty that we showed up when it mattered most. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.